a stolen RV, a $1 million ministry, and a megachurch hiding a secret in plain sight. Holy rollers. Chapter 1. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in the dead corridor between lunch and dinner when Cedar Key did what Cedar Key always did in the 2 o'clock heat, stopped. The pelicans stopped. The mullet stopped jumping. The tourists who'd driven the 41 miles from Gainesville on State Route 24 because someone on the internet had described Cedar Key as a hidden gem with old Florida charm stood in the street in front of the Island Hotel and sweated through their linen and wondered if the hidden gem was air-conditioned. Gumbo was on the stern of the Severance package with the composition book open to a blank page that had been blank since Tuesday, and the particular quality of afternoon stillness that made a man reflect on his choices. He was on his second Yingling. He had a grouper sandwich from the island room wrapped in foil on the stern table that Renata had sent over with Marco at noon, and which he'd eaten half of and was thinking about the other half. His phone rang. The number had a 727 area code, which was the Tampa Bay region, Pinellas, Hillsborough, Pasco. He answered on the third ring. "Is this the private investigator?" The voice was a Florida woman's voice, late 50s, the kind of voice that had spent decades being pleasant in situations that tested pleasantness and had developed a tensile quality underneath. "The one in Cedar Key. Francine Dowd's office gave me your number." "Malone," he said. "What can I do for you?" "My name is Beverly Sutton. I live in Land O'Lakes, Pasco County. I have a situation I need help with, and I can't go to the police because," a pause where she was working out how to say something, "because the person I need to report it to is married to the person I'd be reporting, and the other person I'd report it to is in a position of," another pause. "It's complicated." "Start at the beginning," Gumbo said. "Take your time." She took a breath. He could hear a television in the background, volume low, and the sound of ice in a glass. "3 weeks ago," she said, "I was watching HGTV. The show where they renovate vacation rentals. Do you know the one? They go in, and the place is terrible, and they fix it up, and at the end it's beautiful, and the owners are very happy." "I know the concept." They were doing an episode on the Outer Banks, North Carolina. Beautiful homes, very expensive area. And they were renovating a property on the water. And at the end of the episode, they show the driveway and the parking and the exterior, and there is our RV. A pause, something shifting in it. Our RV. Our 2021 Tiffin Allegro bus. 40 feet. Burgundy and silver with a custom pinstripe that my husband Randy had done in 2022 because he wanted something distinctive. You can see the pinstripe clearly in the episode. You can see the door handle that Randy replaced with a brushed nickel lever because the original was chrome and he didn't like chrome. Gumbo was writing. 2021 Tiffin Allegro bus. 40 feet, burgundy silver, custom pinstripe, brushed nickel lever handle. "What is your RV doing at a vacation rental property on the Outer Banks?" he said. "That is the question." Her voice had the controlled precision of a woman delivering testimony she'd rehearsed. 14 months ago, our church, Covenant of Grace Fellowship in Land O'Lakes, our pastor, Pastor Donnie Shores, announced a new ministry initiative. The RV Ministry for the Faithful. The idea was that members of the congregation who owned recreational vehicles could donate the use of them for church mission trips, youth group retreats, elderly outreach in rural areas, disaster relief support. Randy and we prayed on it, and we felt called to participate. We donated the use of the Allegro for 1 year. Signed the paperwork, gave them the keys. What did the paperwork say? That the RV would be used exclusively for church-approved ministry activities. That it would be maintained at the church's expense. That we'd have it back at the end of the 12-month period, in good working order. And you got it back? 6 weeks ago. It came back clean, no mechanical issues, the pinstripe was fine. Randy walked the whole thing. We thought everything was in order. A pause, the ice in the glass moving. And then 3 weeks ago, I'm watching HGTV. Gumbo looked at what he'd written. He wrote, RV Ministry for the Faithful, 12-mo donation period, mission trip cover story, actually Airbnb? He underlined the last word with a question mark, and then added one more question mark. The HGTV episode, he said. The property in the Outer Banks. The RV is parked on the driveway of the rental property as part of the listing. It's in the driveway of a property that rents for $800 a night. Beverly Sutton's voice was still controlled, but something in it had gone taut, the way a line goes taut when what's on the other end is heavier than expected. I found the listing online after the episode. Pelican's Reach, that's the property name. It's a 4-bedroom waterfront home in Duck, North Carolina. The listing shows amenities including, and I am quoting directly, a luxury Class A motorhome available for extended trips, sleep 6, full kitchen and bath. They're renting our RV as part of the property package. For how long has the listing been active? I can see the review history on the rental platform. The motorhome amenity was added 14 months ago. Gumbo looked at the math. 14 months ago was when the RV Ministry for the Faithful had launched. He wrote, simultaneous launch. Not coincidence. Have you talked to your husband about this? He said. The pause this time was longer and had a different weight. Randy is a deacon at Covenant of Grace, she said. He has been a deacon for 11 years. We have given, a significant amount to this church. Time, money, service. Randy believes in Pastor Donnie he has a very strong faith relationship with the pastor. She stopped. I showed Randy the HGTV episode. I showed him the rental listing. I showed him the pinstripe and the door handle. What did he say? He said, there must be an explanation. He said Pastor Donnie wouldn't do something like that. He said I was being uncharitable. The ice moved in the glass again. Then he called the church office and spoke to someone on Pastor Donnie's staff, and whoever he spoke to told him the RV had been used for a retreat at a partner ministry in North Carolina, and the partner ministry must have listed it without authorization, and it was all being sorted out. And Randy believed that. Randy believes what he needs to believe, Beverly said, and the sentence had the flat, exhausted quality of something said about a person you loved very much and had stopped arguing with on this specific subject. Why can't you go to the police? Gumbo said. The Pasco County Sheriff's Department, the Land O'Lakes District, the lieutenant in charge is Walter Grimes. Walter Grimes has been a member of Covenant of Grace for 7 years. He sits 2 rows behind us every Sunday. A pause. His wife is in the women's Bible study with me. She's lovely. It's not her fault. Gumbo wrote, Lieutenant Grimes, COG member 7 year. He looked at it. Florida kept providing this particular arrangement. The institutional and the personal so knotted together that the standard avenues led directly back to the problem. Tell me about Pastor Donnie, he said. Beverly Sutton took a breath that suggested she was deciding how much was fair to say and how much crossed a line she'd set for herself. Donnie Shores has been the senior pastor of Covenant of Grace for 16 years, she said. He built the congregation from about 400 families to over 3,000. The church campus is 12 acres in Land O'Lakes. Main sanctuary seats 4,000. There's a children's wing, a youth center, a cafe, a bookstore. They broadcast the Sunday service on 3 regional cable channels and have a YouTube channel with a pause. A lot of followers. Randy watches the Thursday devotional every week. Charismatic. The preaching style. Very. He has a gift. When Donnie Shores speaks to you one-on-one, you feel, it's hard to describe. You feel like you're the most important person he's talked to all day, and like he sees something in you that other people miss. She said it without warmth, without the performance of admiration. She said it the way you describe the specifications of something that could hurt you. He's also very protected. He has a security team, 4 men, retired law enforcement. They rotate through services and events. I don't know if that's standard for churches this size. Some churches, Gumbo said. It's a lot of men for a house of God, is what Randy's mother says. And Randy's mother was a Baptist all her life and considers anything above 1 usher to be institutional overreach. A beat. She's not wrong. Gumbo looked at his composition book. The page had filled up faster than it usually did on a first call. This was a woman who had organized her information before she picked up the phone, which told him something about what the last 3 weeks had been like. "What do you want from me?" he said. "I want to know if other people in the congregation had their RVs listed as rental amenities. I want to know who's running this and whether Pastor Donnie knows about it. And I want documentation, something Randy can't explain away as a misunderstanding or me being uncharitable." A pause. "I love my husband. He is a good man, with a blind spot the size of a Tiffin Allegro bus." Gumbo almost smiled. "I'll need to see the HGTV episode. The rental listing. The donation paperwork you signed. And anything you know about who specifically at the church administers the RV ministry. I can send all of that today. The ministry is administered through the church's outreach office. The outreach director is a man named Kyle Shores." Gumbo's pen stopped. "Shores? Pastor Donnie's son," Beverly said. "He's 28. He joined the church staff about 18 months ago. He handles outreach, community partnerships, that kind of thing." A pause with something careful in it. Kyle is very personable. Very smooth. He's not ordained, he doesn't preach. He handles the organizational side. The ministry launched 2 months after Kyle joined the staff. "Yes," Beverly said. "I noticed that." She sent the documents within the hour. Gumbo spread them across the stern table, with his reading glasses on, and the composition book open beside them. Pete occupied his piling, with the dignified stillness of a creature that understood documents were being reviewed, and had made peace with its exclusion from the process. The donation paperwork was 3 pages, clean and professional. A ministry agreement on Covenant of Grace letterhead with a gold cross watermark and the church's tagline, "Where Grace Meets Purpose," printed in a smaller font below the logo. It specified the donation period, the permitted uses, ministry travel, outreach events, disaster response, the maintenance obligations, and a liability waiver. It was signed by Beverly and Randy Sutton, and countersigned by the outreach director, Kyle Shores, with the title Director of Community Partnerships below his name. The signature was fluid and practiced. The kind of signature a person developed when they signed a lot of documents quickly. He pulled up the HGTV episode on his laptop. Flip the Coast, Season 4, Episode 9, Pelican's Reach Rising. He scrubbed to the 23-minute mark where the exterior reveal happened. The renovated 4-bedroom waterfront home in Duck, North Carolina. The gravel driveway newly landscaped with ornamental grasses and a low stone retaining wall. And there in the drive, unmistakable, large as a city bus, the 2021 Tiffin Allegro in burgundy and silver with the pinstripe running the full length of the coach, port side clearly visible to the camera. He paused it and leaned in. Found the door handle. Brushed nickel lever, just as Beverly had said. He found the property listing. Pelican's Reach on VRBO. 4 bedrooms, 4 baths, waterfront, private dock, fire pit, outdoor shower, and the motorhome. Sleeps 6, full kitchen and bath, available for extended coastal trips. At the time of the episode, 14 months ago, the nightly rate for the property package, including the motorhome, had been $812. He looked at the review history the platform made public. The property had 61 reviews over 14 months, with an average rating of 4.8 stars. Several reviews mentioned the motorhome specifically. The RV was a wonderful bonus. We used it for a day trip to Corolla, and the motorhome is in perfect condition. Feels brand new, and from a reviewer 8 months back, we couldn't believe the value. The RV alone would cost a fortune to rent separately. He did the rough math. 61 stays at an average of 4 nights, each at roughly $800, was just under $200,000 in 14 months. For one RV. He looked at the math for a long time. Then he pulled up the Covenant of Grace website and spent 40 minutes on it. The campus was everything Beverly had described. 12 acres. The main sanctuary, a glass and stone structure that looked like a tech campus, had become briefly interested in salvation and then committed to it. The children's wing was called Journey Kids. The youth center was called The Launch. The cafe was called Grounds for Hope, which Gumbo felt was either very good or very bad, and he hadn't decided which. The staff page had photographs. Donnie Shores was 61, silver-haired, with the kind of face that photographed as either sincere or performing sincerity, depending on what you already thought of the enterprise. He had a jaw built for conviction, and eyes that caught the camera with the practiced warmth of someone who understood that warmth was a tool and had made his peace with using it. Kyle Shores was his father's face at 28. The same jaw, the same camera-ready quality, but where the father's face had the settled authority of someone who had built something, the son's face had the bright, forward-leaning energy of someone who was still figuring out what he was building and enjoying the process of figuring. He wore an open-collar shirt in the photo. He was not wearing a cross. Gumbo looked at the son's photograph for a while. He looked at the father's. He wrote in the composition book, Q, does Donnie know? He underlined it. Then he wrote Q, does it matter? He underlined that too, and sat back in the stern chair and looked at the harbor, where the mullet had started jumping again in the late afternoon light. Pete turned his head toward the water, tracking. A man in a kayak came around the east end of the marina, doing the tourist version of kayaking, which involved a lot of paddle inefficiency and a GoPro mounted to the bow. And Pete watched him with the focused disdain of a creature that had watched humans attempt the water for 7 years and remained appropriately skeptical. He called Francine. The RV church thing, she said immediately. Beverly Sutton. You heard the whole call. She called me first. I told her you were the right fit. A pause. Pasco County, Land O'Lakes, megachurch with a security team and a sheriff's lieutenant in the congregation. You don't want a Tampa Pie anywhere near this. Too many overlapping relationships. You know people at COG. I know people who know people at COG. It's Tampa Bay. Every real estate developer, car dealer, and personal injury attorney in the region is either a member or has a client who is. He heard her chair move. What have you got? He walked her through it. The math on Pelican's Reach, the signature on the ministry agreement, the timeline, Kyle joining the staff 18 months ago, the ministry launching 2 months later. The son, Francine said when he finished. Running it out of the church without the church's knowledge, or with the church's complicity, or with the pastor's complicity specifically. Those are 3 different problems. Different in kind, and different in exposure. She was quiet for a moment. 200,000 off one RV. In 14 months. How many RVs did the ministry take in? I don't know yet. That's what I'd want to know. Another pause. There's a contact I have at the county property appraiser's office in Pasco who does a Tuesday morning tennis game. I can reach out through a third party and get the church's filed organizational documents. Membership rolls are private, but the nonprofit filings list ministry programs and their stated purposes. If the RV ministry is a registered program, there may be an asset inventory in the annual disclosure. How long? Tuesday at the earliest. Maybe Thursday. She paused. How are you going to get in? The church runs a grief support group on Tuesday evenings, he said. He'd found it in the community programming section of the website. Open to the public. No church membership required. Silence on the line. Gumbo. It's the right access point. Low security presence at a weeknight small group. Mixed community attendance. Easy cover. I know it's the right access point. She said it carefully. I'm saying, those groups are full of real people with real things they're dealing with. You go in there and play a role. I know. You've done harder things than this. I know that too. Okay. A breath. Call me after Tuesday. He hung up and sat with it for a moment. The kayak tourist had made it to the far end of the marina and was attempting a turn that the GoPro was going to document whether he pulled it off or not. He called Beverly Sutton back. I'm taking the case, he said. Day rate plus expenses. I'll need something from you. The names of any other church members you know of who donated to the RV ministry. Even one name. I need to know if this is one vehicle or a fleet. A short silence. I can think of 2 families off the top of my head. The Marchettis, they have a Class C, a Thor magnitude. And the Holloways, Bob and Linda. They have a smaller unit, a travel trailer, 27 feet. They donated theirs around the same time we donated ours. Gumbo wrote both names. Marchetti, Thor magnitude Class C Holloway, travel trailer 27 feet. One more thing, he said. What does your husband do for work? Randy's in commercial HVAC. He owns his own company, Sutton Climate Solutions. 12 employees, he's been in business 22 years. A pause. Why? Because when this is over, he's going to need something that can't be explained away. Something that respects what he's built at that church, and what you've built together, and still makes him see what you're seeing. He let that sit for a moment. You're not asking me to blow up his faith. You're asking me to protect him from the people who are using it. The silence on Beverly's end was longer than most. Yes, she said. That's exactly what I'm asking. He drove up to Land O'Lakes on Monday to look at the church from the outside, because you always looked at a thing from the outside before you tried to get inside it. The campus sat off State Route 54, which was the main commercial artery through Land O'Lakes, a 4-lane road lined with the full catalog of American franchise development, Targets, and Chick-fil-A's and urgent care centers and car washes of increasing ambition. Covenant of Grace occupied the north side of State Route 54 between a Planet Fitness and a storage facility, which Gumbo noted without comment. The entrance was a divided boulevard with a stone sign, Covenant of Grace Fellowship, where grace meets purpose, and mature crepe myrtles trimmed to identical lollipop shapes lining both sides of the drive. The main sanctuary was visible from the road, the glass and stone structure Beverly had described, a cross rising from its roofline that was large enough to be seen from the Planet Fitness parking lot. He drove the perimeter without pulling into the campus. The campus had 3 visible entrance points: the main boulevard off State Route 54, a secondary access road on the east side that appeared to serve the children's wing and the youth center, and a service entrance at the rear accessible from a side street. The rear of the campus had a large paved lot, staff and ministry parking, no public signage, and at the edge of the lot, under a corrugated metal canopy, he could see recreational vehicles. He counted 6 from the road. 2 classes, 3 Class Cs or travel trailers, and 1 unit large enough to be a fifth wheel. The canopy was new. The concrete footing still showed discoloration from recent work. He drove past twice. The second time, he slowed enough to see the signage on the canopy post: RV Ministry for the Faithful, Ministry Fleet, authorized personnel only. 6 vehicles under a canopy, built in the last year. He drove back south on State Route 54 and found a Panera 2 miles from the campus and ordered a coffee and sat in a corner booth and did math in the composition book. If Pelican's Reach had generated $200,000 off 1 vehicle in 14 months, and if the ministry fleet was 6 vehicles, and if each vehicle was generating comparable revenue from rental listings, the operation was running at somewhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million annually. He stared at that number. He crossed it out and rewrote it in case he'd made an error. He hadn't. $1.2 million, flowing through what appeared to be a luxury vacation rental operation, dressed as a church ministry program, administered by a 28-year-old with his father's jaw and an open-collar shirt and no visible cross. He drank his coffee and looked at the number. He thought about Beverly Sutton watching HGTV and recognizing her door handle. He thought about Randy Sutton calling the church office and getting an explanation that satisfied the part of him that needed to be satisfied. He wrote at the bottom of the page, Tuesday. Grief group. 7 p.m. Then he wrote, go in honest about the loss. Lie about everything else. He closed the book. Outside the Panera window, State Route 54 ran its commercial length under a hard blue Pasco County sky, the franchise corridor doing what it did: selling, servicing, maintaining the machinery of daily life in the suburban Florida manner, which was efficiently and without sentiment and with excellent signage. The crepe myrtles at the Covenant of Grace entrance were visible from the Panera lot, their lollipop tops catching the afternoon light at the end of the boulevard. He thought about the grief support group for a while. He'd lost his father 3 years before the forced retirement, a man named Gerald Malone, who had worked for the city of Columbus in the water department for 31 years and had opinions about municipal infrastructure and the designated hitter rule and not much else, and who had died of a stroke in a hospital room in March while Gumbo was on a conference call about Q3 procurement projections that he had not left to go to the hospital because he'd believed there would be more time. There had not been more time. He had not talked about this with anyone except Renata, once, on the boat, at night, and even then only a version of it. He sat in the Panera for longer than he'd intended. Then he left a $2 tip for a counter order, which was more than was asked for and less than he felt, and drove back south toward the Suncoast Parkway and the long road home to Cedar Key. Tuesday was coming. Chapter 2. He drove up from Cedar Key Tuesday afternoon, which gave him 3 hours before the 7 o'clock group, which was enough time to get there and find the room and sit in the parking lot and think about what he was doing and then do it anyway. He wore the red hibiscus shirt. He'd stood in the forward cabin of the severance package for 5 minutes deciding between the blue marlins and the red hibiscus, and had gone with the red hibiscus on the theory that the blue marlins read as vacation, and the red hibiscus read as a man who had been wearing this shirt for 2 years and hadn't thought too carefully about it, which was closer to the character he needed. He'd left Pete with Deanne, which Pete tolerated with the resigned dignity of a creature that understood travel logistics even when he found them personally offensive. Deanne had put Pete on the dock piling outside the marina office and given him a fish from the bait case, and Pete had eaten the fish and stared at the harbor and made no further comment. "How long?" Deanne had said. "Few days." maybe more. She'd looked at him with the maternal precision she deployed when she thought he was underestimating something. You eating? I eat. You eat whatever's in reach. That's different. She'd handed him a paper bag. He'd found 2 Cuban sandwiches and a bag of plantain chips in it when he stopped for gas in Chiefland. State Route 54 was doing its usual thing when he came off the Suncoast Parkway, 4 lanes of late-afternoon commerce, moving at the pace of a region that had more errands than infrastructure. He found a Holiday Inn Express 4 miles from the church campus, checked in under his name, and ate the second Cuban sandwich at the desk in the room while he reviewed his notes. The grief support group was called Walking Through. It met every Tuesday at 7 in what the Covenant of Grace website called the Community Life Center, which from the campus map appeared to be a building adjacent to the main sanctuary, connected by a covered walkway. The group was described as a safe space for those navigating loss of any kind, a loved one, a relationship, a season of life. All are welcome. No church affiliation required. Facilitated by Pastor Mike Alderman. No church affiliation required. He'd looked up Mike Alderman. Associate pastor, Covenant of Grace, 8 years on staff. Seminary-trained, licensed counselor, ran 4 different small groups in addition to the grief group. His photograph on the staff page showed a man in his mid-40s with a quiet face. Not the camera-ready quality of Donnie Shores or the forward-leaning brightness of Kyle, but the specific face of someone who had chosen to sit with people in their worst moments and had been doing it long enough that the choice had become structural. Gumbo looked at the photograph for a while. He thought about what he'd written in the composition book, Go in honest about the loss. Lie about everything else. He looked at the Cuban sandwich wrapper. He thought about his father. The Community Life Center was a single-story building with warm lighting visible through its windows and a parking lot that held at 645, about 20 cars spread across the painted spaces with the organic distribution of people who had arrived individually without coordination at a thing they were coming to alone. He parked and sat in the Jeep for 4 minutes. He went in. The lobby had the carpeted, climate-controlled quality of institutional spaces designed for comfort, with a coffee station against one wall, a proper one, a commercial drip machine with 2 carafes and a basket of individual creamers, and a bulletin board covered in flyers for other programs, a lost cat notice, a card from someone named Sheila thanking the group for their support in her difficult year, and a child's drawing of what appeared to be a family holding hands under a sun that was equal parts yellow and orange and labeled in careful crayon, "We are okay." He poured a coffee. He read Sheila's card. He looked at the drawing for a moment. Then he followed the carpet and the low sound of voices to a room off the main corridor. The room held 12 people arranged in a circle of padded chairs, the kind of chairs that were comfortable enough to sit in for 90 minutes without performing comfort. 2 of the 12 were already talking to each other in the low-register way people talk before a group starts. Not about the thing they're there for. About other things, about weather and parking, and how busy State Route 54 had been. The specific small talk of people who have learned to ease into rooms like this rather than enter them all at once. A man at the far side of the circle stood when Gumbo came in. Mike Alderman was slightly shorter than his photograph suggested, and had the posture of someone who had learned not to fill space unnecessarily in rooms where people came to fill it themselves. He was wearing khakis and a blue button-down with no tie, the kind of deliberate non-uniform that said, "I am not here as an institution." He extended his hand. Mike Alderman. "Welcome. First time?" "Yes." Gumbo shook his hand. "Gumbo Malone. I saw the group listed on the website. We're glad you're here. No performance in it. just the flat, genuine quality of a man who said this sentence often enough that it had worn smooth. Help yourself to coffee. Find a seat wherever feels right. Wherever feels right. Gumbo found a chair between a woman in her 60s, with a tissue folded in her hand, and a man about his own age in a Carhartt shirt who had the look of someone doing the same calculation Gumbo was doing. How much to be here, how much to hold back, except that the man in the Carhartt shirt was doing it for real. He sat down. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at the circle. 12 people. The woman with the tissue. The Carhartt man. A younger woman, late 20s, with the particular stillness of someone who had recently stopped crying and was managing the aftermath. An older couple sitting adjacent to each other, but not quite together, in the way of people who had come to the same place to deal with different versions of the same thing. A man in his 50s with a college football polo, who sat forward in his chair with his elbows on his knees, looking at the floor. 3 women in their 40s, who appeared to know each other, and had positioned themselves across the circle from each other, with the distributed awareness of people who understood that support worked better at a distance. A teenager, 17, maybe 18, sitting with his arms crossed, and the expression of someone who had been required to be here and had not yet decided whether to resent it. A woman in her 70s, in a church dress, who held a small Bible on her lap without opening it. And Mike Alderman, who looked at the circle with the patient attention of a man waiting for a room to be ready. The group started the way Alderman apparently started every group, which Gumbo understood from the procedural ease of it. A brief welcome, a statement of the group's purpose that was low on churchness and high on practicality, a reminder that what was said in the room stayed in the room, an explicit statement that participation was voluntary and silence was always an acceptable choice. Then he asked if anyone wanted to begin. The woman with the tissue, whose name was Lorraine, began. She was 63, widowed 7 months ago. Her husband Don had died of pancreatic cancer, which had gone from diagnosis to death in 4 months, which she said was both faster than anyone had prepared her for, and slower than Don had wanted. He wasn't a man who liked to wait, she said. He was the kind of man who had his suitcase packed the night before a trip. He would have been annoyed at 4 months. She laughed at this, a small, real laugh with tears in it simultaneously, the kind of laugh that only happened when grief had been lived with long enough that there was room in it for something else. The Carhartt man was named Dave. His daughter had died 11 months ago. She was 23. He said this and then stopped and looked at his hands, and Mike Alderman let the stop be a stop, didn't move to fill it, and after a long moment Dave looked up and said, "I still set an alarm for 6:30. She used to call me at 6:30 when she had a long drive. So she wouldn't drive tired." He paused again. "I don't know why I'm still setting it." Nobody told him why. Nobody offered a reason. The room just held it. Gumbo looked at the carpet between his shoes. The younger woman's name was Priya. She had lost a pregnancy 5 months ago. She said it carefully, precisely, in the way of someone who had learned that precision was how you carried something without dropping it in public. She said, "People kept telling me I was young and I'd try again and there was time. And I kept thinking, yes, probably. But I don't want that baby. I want this one." She said this one. And something in the room shifted the way rooms shift when a sentence arrives that was true before it was spoken, and everyone recognizes it. The older couple were Bob and Linda, and they had lost their son Marcus 18 months ago to a fentanyl overdose, and they had come to this group separately at first, Bob on a Tuesday in January, Linda the following week, and had been coming together since March. And what was clear from the way they talked about Marcus was that they were grieving the same person and having almost entirely different experiences of it. And the group had become, in some way Gumbo didn't fully understand yet, the place where both experiences could exist at the same time without one having to become the other. The football polo man was named Gerald. He looked up briefly when Mike said his name, the reflex of a man still surprised that Gerald was his name in a group like this. And he had retired 18 months ago after 34 years as a contractor and found in the retirement that he had lost something he didn't have a name for. It wasn't the job, he said carefully. I didn't love the job. But the job was, I knew what I was for. He looked at the floor again. Now I don't know what I'm for. The teenager was Marcus's younger brother, Gumbo realized. The same last name on the intake sheet he'd glanced at in the lobby, the same set to the jaw. He didn't speak this first time, and no one asked him to. The woman in the church dress was named Eunice. She was 74, and she had lost her sister of 61 years of friendship, not blood, not family on paper, but the person who had known her since the 3rd grade and who had died in January of congestive heart failure. People say I'm sorry for your loss like they would for a spouse, Eunice said. But Gloria and I were past the point where it's a loss. It's more like, a part of me that knew where everything was isn't there anymore. And I keep reaching for things, and my hand comes back empty. The 3 women in their 40s had each lost a marriage in the last 2 years, different circumstances, different endings, different relationships with the word divorce, and had found each other through the group and maintained a group text between Tuesdays that Gumbo gathered from the texture of their shared awareness was frank and specific and probably funnier than anything that happened in the circle. Mike Alderman moved the room without steering it, which was the skill Gumbo recognized from the outside. The particular intelligence of a facilitator who understood that his job was to keep the space open, not to fill it. He asked questions that were specific rather than general. Not how are you doing, but how was last week specifically. And the specificity made people answer differently, more honestly, because it was harder to give a general answer to a specific question. When he got to Gumbo, he said simply, Gumbo. You're welcome to share anything or nothing. Gumbo looked at the circle. He thought about what he'd written in the composition book. He said, my father died 3 years ago. I was on a conference call when it happened. I didn't leave the call because I thought there would be more time, and there wasn't. He stopped. I've been thinking about it more lately. This was true. The last part was true, and the first 2 parts were true, and together they were more honest than he'd intended to be, and less honest than the room deserved. He sat with that. Mike Alderman said, thank you for being here, Gumbo. And that was it. No further question, no gentle probe, no attempt to open the door wider than Gumbo had opened it. Just the acknowledgement. Just the room holding what he'd put in it. He looked at the carpet again. He did not look at his composition book, which was in the Jeep. He had left it in the Jeep deliberately. He was not going to write about these people. He was already thinking about them. The group ran until 8:30. Afterward, in the lobby, the coffee station drew people the way coffee stations always drew people at the end of things. It gave your hands something to do while your feet decided whether to leave. Gumbo poured a second cup he didn't need, and stood near the bulletin board and let the room self-organize around him. Lorraine stopped beside him to look at the lost cat notice. 11 weeks, she said, reading the date on the notice. I hope someone found it. People usually do, he said. Do they? She said it without argument, just the mildness of someone examining the statement. Don always said cats found their own way home. He was a dog person. She looked at the notice. I got a dog in February. His name is Don. She paused. My daughter said that was too on the nose. I said it was my house and my dog. What kind? Beagle. He's terrible, and I love him. She looked at Gumbo over the rim of her cup. You drove up from Cedar Key? Yes. That's a long drive for a Tuesday evening. The group sounded right, he said. She nodded, the way people nodded when they understood the sentence behind the sentence. It is right. Mike he's a good man. He doesn't try to fix you. She lowered her cup. Some of the other programming here does. But not Mike. Other programming. The church has a lot of programs. Some of them are very good. She said it with the careful balance of a woman who had attended the church long enough to have opinions and had learned when to voice them and when to fold them up and keep them. Some of them are more enthusiastic than helpful. You know what I mean. I might. She looked at him for a moment, with the appraisal of someone who had spent 63 years learning to read people and wasn't in any hurry. You're not from here, she said. Cedar Key. No, I mean, she gestured, a small circular motion that indicated the church, the county, the particular geography of Covenant of Grace. You're not from this world. No. She seemed to decide something. Well, Mike's group is good regardless. The rest of it is, she looked at the bulletin board. It's a big machine. Sometimes the machine is running for the right reasons, and sometimes it's just running. She put her cup in the recycling. Good night, Gumbo. I hope you come back. She walked out through the lobby glass doors and into the parking lot, and Gumbo watched her go and thought about what she'd said and added it to the running account he was keeping in his head because the composition book was in the Jeep. Dave, the Carhartt man, was by the coffee station when Gumbo turned around. He was looking at the carafes without pouring anything, doing the thing people did when they weren't ready to leave but didn't have a reason to stay. Gumbo refilled his cup and stood next to him and didn't say anything for a moment. Dave said, "Conference call." Gumbo looked at him. You said you were on a conference call when your father died. Dave poured a cup of coffee he also probably didn't need. I was on a job site. In Gainesville. We were pouring a foundation slab. I got the call from her roommate, and I finished out the pour. He looked at the cup. It takes 4 hours to finish a slab pour. You can't stop mid-pour. I knew that and I did it anyway. And I've run through that 4 hours 10,000 times. What would you have done differently? Gumbo said. It wasn't quite a question. I would have left, Dave said. I know you can't leave mid-pour. But I would have left. He drank some coffee. She was already gone. The roommate told me. There was nothing to rush home for. But I would have left. Gumbo stood with that. Yeah, he said. They stood by the coffee station for another minute without talking. It was a comfortable silence, the specific comfort of two men who had each done a version of the same thing and weren't trying to explain it to each other. Dave said, You coming back next week? Planning on it, Gumbo said. Dave nodded. He put his cup down and picked up his keys. See you Tuesday, he said, and walked out. He sat in the Jeep in the parking lot for 10 minutes before he started it. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't reviewing the evening, cataloging what he'd observed, planning next steps. He was just sitting in the Jeep in the parking lot of Covenant of Grace at 8:45 on a Tuesday night in Land O'Lakes, Florida, listening to the parking lot sounds. The HVAC units on the Community Life Center cycling, a car radio going quiet as someone left, the particular silence of a mostly empty lot. He thought about Dave finishing the foundation pour. He thought about the Q3 conference call. He could remember the specific agenda item he'd been on when his phone had buzzed with the hospital's number. Supplier performance metrics for the Midwest distribution region. A conversation about a 3% variance in corrugated cardboard costs that had seemed in the moment like a thing that required his full attention. He started the Jeep. He called Renata from the parking lot before he pulled out, because it was 9 o'clock, and she'd be coming off the dinner service and would have her phone. She picked up on the second ring. He could hear the kitchen behind her, going through its end-of-night sounds, the industrial dishwasher cycling, Marco saying something to the line in Spanish, the specific clatter of a professional kitchen putting itself back in order. "How was the group?" she said. She knew where he'd been and why, in the broad version. "Real," he said. A pause. "You okay?" "Yeah." He looked at the Covenant of Grace main sanctuary through the windshield, the cross lit against the night sky, the glass face of the building dark now, everything closed down for the evening. "I talked about my dad." "In the group?" "Yeah." "Okay," she said. Not a question. Not a probe. Just the acknowledgement, the same quality Mike Alderman had, the willingness to let a thing be what it was without trying to improve on it. "The group is good," he said. "The facilitator is a good man." "And the rest of it?" He looked at the cross. "Working on it," he said. "Come home when you can," she said. "Marco made snapper tonight. There's some in the walk-in. Tell him I said thanks. Tell him yourself. He likes you for reasons I don't fully understand." He almost smiled. "Good night, Renata." "Good night, Gumbo." He spent Wednesday in the parking lot. Not the Covenant of Grace lot. The service road behind the campus that ran along the east side of the property, from which the rear parking area and the RV canopy were partially visible through a stand of palmettos that had been growing there long enough to achieve genuine screening density. He parked the Jeep on the service road shoulder behind a landscaping truck and a utility trailer, and ate a gas station breakfast sandwich and watched. The activity at the RV canopy started at 9:40. A young man, mid-20s, in cargo shorts and a Covenant of Grace staff polo, came out of a door at the rear of the administrative building with a clipboard and a set of keys and walked to the canopy. He went down the row of vehicles one by one, unlocking each and spending 3 to 5 minutes inside before coming back out, relocking and moving to the next. Gumbo counted 6 vehicles, consistent with what he'd seen Monday. The young man was checking them. Condition, mechanical, interior. He'd seen this walkthrough done in fleet management operations in rental car lots, anywhere a fleet needed maintenance oversight. This was not a church maintaining vehicles for occasional mission trips. This was a fleet operation with a maintenance protocol. He photographed it from the service road with the long lens, the canopy, the vehicles, the young man with the clipboard, the staff polo. He got the polo logo clearly on the third shot when the man turned to relock a Class A, and the back of the polo was readable, Covenant of Grace Outreach Team. At 11:15, a white pickup truck with a Shores Property Solutions magnetic door sign pulled into the rear lot and parked near the canopy. A man got out. 28 years old, his father's jaw, open-collar shirt, the forward-leaning brightness Gumbo had seen in the staff photograph, but in person the brightness was different, had more wattage, the kind of presence that preceded its owner into a room and made the room adjust. Kyle Shores walked the canopy the same way the polo employee had, down the row, one vehicle at a time, but without the clipboard. He walked it like a man reviewing inventory he owned. He spent 5 minutes at the largest Class A, the one at the far end of the row, and made a call on his phone while he stood at the vehicle's side compartment. The call lasted 7 minutes. He nodded twice during it and laughed once, a short, easy laugh, the laugh of someone delivering good news. Gumbo photographed all of it. Kyle Shores left at 11:45 in the white pickup. The magnetic sign was Shores Property Solutions, not a church affiliation, not a ministry designation. A private business, operating out of the church's rear lot, using the church's vehicles. He wrote in the composition book, Shores Property Solutions. Private. Not church entity. Q. Registered business. Q. Who are the clients? He pulled out his phone and ran a Secretary of State search on Shore's Property Solutions while he sat on the service road. Registered 14 months ago. Sole proprietor, Kyle M. Shores. Business type, property management and hospitality consulting. Registered address, a mailbox service in Wesley Chapel, Pasco County. He wrote the registration date, 14 months ago. The RV Ministry for the Faithful had launched 14 months ago. Shore's Property Solutions had registered 14 months ago. He looked at both dates. Then he ran a search on Pelican's Reach, Duck NC property ownership. The Duck property was owned by an LLC, Outer Banks Coastal Holdings. He ran the LLC registration. Registered in Delaware, the standard flag of an entity that didn't want its principals publicly visible. Registered agent, a Wilmington formation service that handled 1,000 entities and knew the principals of none of them. He wrote Delaware LLC, Pelican's Reach principals hidden. Need a different angle. He looked at the Palmetto stand, and the canopy, and the 6 vehicles sitting under it. He thought about $200,000 off one RV in 14 months. He thought about Beverly Sutton watching HGTV and recognizing her door handle. He thought about what Lorraine had said. Sometimes the machine is running for the right reasons, and sometimes it's just running. He looked at the Shore's Property Solutions entry in the composition book. He wrote underneath it, "The machine is running. Question is whether Donnie knows he's the engine." Thursday, he called Francine. "I've got the nonprofit filings," she said without preamble. The RV Ministry for the Faithful is listed as a registered ministry program of Covenant of Grace Fellowship, a 501c3. The program description in the annual disclosure is, actually it's quite good. Mission travel support, disaster response, rural outreach. Convincing. Who filed the program registration? The church's nonprofit administrator. A woman named Susan Park, been on staff 6 years. She signs all the organizational filings. She's not involved, she files what she's given. Francine paused. Here's the thing. The ministry program is registered with the church's nonprofit. But the vehicles in the program, the RVs, they're not on the church's asset inventory. Gumbo stopped writing. Not on the asset inventory, he said. They're not church assets. They're personal property donated for use, which means they're not the church's responsibility to list. But it also means the church has no direct financial relationship with the vehicles. No revenue flows through the church from the vehicles. The church is the front. The operation runs parallel. Through Shore's Property Solutions, Francine said. Which I found, by the way. Delaware LLC on the Outer Banks property is going to take me longer. I'm working a contact in North Carolina. While you're at it, look for any other vacation rental properties managed by Shore's Property Solutions. If Pelican's Reach is one, there are probably more. Already looking. A pause. How's the grief group? Good, he said, and meant it, which surprised him when he heard himself say it. A brief silence on Francine's end. You're going back Tuesday? Yes. Gumbo. I know. You know what I'm going to say. You're going to say these are real people dealing with real things, and at some point I'm going to have to be straight with them about why I was there. I was going to say be careful, Francine said. But yes, that too. He looked at the composition book. Go in honest about the loss. Lie about everything else. He'd gone in honest about the loss. That part he hadn't lied about. But everything else was construction. And at some point the construction would be visible and the real people with the real things would see it. He thought about Dave and the foundation pour. He thought about Eunice and her hand coming back empty. He closed the composition book. Call me when you have the North Carolina angle, he said. Wednesday at the latest, she said. And gumbo? Yeah. Eat something. He looked at the gas station breakfast sandwich wrapper on the passenger seat, which had been there since morning and would not be improved by further examination. Deanne packed me plantain chips, he said. That's not food, that's a category. She hung up. He drove back to the Holiday Inn Express on State Route 54 and ordered a pizza from a place 2 blocks away that had a hand-painted sign and the confident posture of an establishment that had survived the franchise corridor by being better than it and knew it. The pizza arrived in 20 minutes. It was very good. He ate it at the desk with the composition book open and thought about Kyle Shores and his father's jaw and the white pickup and the 7-minute phone call where he'd laughed his short, easy laugh next to the Class A motorhome. Tuesday was coming again. Then somewhere between the grief group and the rear parking lot and the 14-months-old LLC and the door handle on a Tiffin Allegro bus, the case was starting to take its full shape, not the shape he'd expected from Beverly Sutton's call, but a larger one with more people in it and more damage done, and a 28-year-old with his father's jaw sitting at the center of it, running a machine that the man who'd given him the jaw didn't know was running. Or didn't know he knew. Gumbo wasn't sure yet which one it was. He wrote the question at the bottom of the page, the same question he'd written before, and underlined it again because it still needed answering. Does Donnie know? He closed the book. He finished the pizza. Outside on State Route 54, the franchise corridor ran its nighttime operations. The drive-thrus, the gas stations, the urgent care centers that apparently operated around the clock in Pasco County because urgency observed no business hours. The cross on Covenant of Grace's sanctuary was visible from the hotel parking lot, lit white against the dark, steady and large. He looked at it for a moment through the window. Then he pulled the curtain and went to sleep. Chapter 3. Francine called Wednesday at 11, which was earlier than she'd promised, which meant she'd found something that wouldn't wait until Wednesday at the latest. 3 properties, she said. Gumbo was in the Holiday Inn Express parking lot, about to get in the Jeep. He got in the Jeep and didn't start it and took out the composition book. Pelican's Reach in Duck is one. The second is a property called Marsh Hen Cottage outside Beaufort, South Carolina. That's the Low Country Beaufort, not the Kentucky one. 4 bedrooms, title Marsh Views, private dock. Listed on VRBO and Airbnb both. The motorhome amenity on that listing is a 2020 Forest River Georgetown, Class A, 35 feet. The third is a place called Blue Heron Landing outside Apalachicola, on the Florida Panhandle. That one's a camp-style property, more rustic, 5 acres, creek access. It lists a travel trailer, 27-foot Keystone Passport. Gumbo wrote all 3. Then he went back through his notes from Beverly Sutton's first call. Holloway, travel trailer 27 feet. The Apalachicola property, he said. The travel trailer. What year? The listing says 2019. He wrote Holloway trailer, 2019 27ths of a foot, Keystone Passport, Blue Heron Landing. He looked at it. The Beaufort property. The Forest River Georgetown. Who donated a Forest River Georgetown? I don't have that yet. Beverly Sutton gave you 3 names, her own and the Marchettis and the Holloways. The Marchettis have a Thor magnitude Class C, the Beaufort property has a Class A Georgetown. He thought about it. Could be a 4th donor Beverly doesn't know about. Could be more. 3 properties, potentially 3 or more vehicles, all running simultaneously. There are 6 vehicles under that canopy, Francine said. 3 properties using 1 vehicle each, that's 3 deployed, 3 in rotation or reserve. Or 3 more properties we haven't found yet. He looked at the composition book. all three managed through Shores Property Solutions. That's where it gets interesting. Pelican's Reach and Marsh Hen Cottage are both listed with Shores Property Solutions as the management contact on the platform. Blue Heron Landing uses a different management identity, something called Gulf Coast Retreats. But the contact email for Gulf Coast Retreats is the same domain as Shores Property Solutions. Someone forgot to change it. Or didn't bother, Gumbo said. Kyle's running fast and not covering every track. He's 28, and it's working, and he hasn't needed to be careful yet. Francine paused. The North Carolina LLC, I got a partial. Outer Banks Coastal Holdings has a registered agent in Wilmington, as you found. But the LLC was formed with an attorney in Raleigh who does vacation property transactions. My North Carolina contact knows the attorney, not well, but enough. The formation documents list a manager of record. A pause with intention in it. KMS Holdings, LLC. Also, Delaware registered. KMS, Gumbo said. Kyle Michael Shores, Francine said. His middle name is on the church staff bio. He wrote it down and looked at it. The nesting of the entities, Shores Property Solutions doing business as Gulf Coast Retreats managing properties owned by Outer Banks Coastal Holdings, managed by KMS Holdings, was the architecture of someone who had either taken a business law class or knew someone who had. It was not sophisticated enough to be invisible, but it was layered enough to require effort to unwind. He set this up before he joined the church staff, Gumbo said. KMS Holdings, the Outer Banks LLC, he had the structure in place and then joined the staff and launched the ministry as the vehicle supply chain. That's how I read it. Which means either he planned this specifically to use his father's congregation, or he had the rental operation running in some form and saw the opportunity when he joined the staff. Does the distinction matter? Gumbo thought about it. For the legal exposure, no. For whether Donnie is involved, maybe. He closed the composition book. Any connection between Shores Property Solutions and the church's bank accounts? Any financial relationship between the entities? Nothing visible. That's the design. The ministry takes the vehicles in. No money changes hands with the church. The church has no revenue relationship with the rental operation. Clean separation. Clean enough that Donnie could not know. Clean enough, Francine said. Or clean enough that Donnie could claim not to know, which is a different thing. Yes, Gumbo said. It is. He spent Thursday morning on the Shores Property Solutions rental listings, all three properties, going through the review histories the way he'd gone through Pelican's Reach. He made a spreadsheet on the laptop, which he found he did when a case went numerical, because the composition book was for thinking and the spreadsheet was for counting, and they were different activities that required different instruments. Pelican's Reach, 61 reviews, 14 months active, estimated 240 nights booked at an average of $812 per night. Revenue estimate, $194,880. Marsh Hen Cottage, 44 reviews, 11 months active. The Beaufort property had a higher nightly rate, $1,100, because the low country market ran hot and the tidal marsh views commanded a premium. Estimated 170 nights booked. Revenue estimate, $187,000. Blue Heron Landing, 29 reviews, 9 months active. The Panhandle property was the most modest, $650 per night, but had a higher occupancy rate because it appeared to market itself to fishing groups and duck hunters and people who wanted acreage rather than waterfront. Estimated 140 nights booked. Revenue estimate, $91,000. He added the column. $472,880. Across 3 properties. In under 14 months of operation. From vehicles that had been donated free of charge by church members who believed they were supporting youth retreats and elderly outreach and disaster relief. He looked at the number for a while. He thought about Beverly Sutton and the door handle on the Tiffin Allegro and the 4 months she'd carried this before finding someone who would listen. He wrote at the bottom of the spreadsheet, minimum estimate, likely higher, 3 properties confirmed, up to 3 more possible, 6 vehicles in canopy. He sent the spreadsheet to Francine with a note, "What's the ceiling if all 6 vehicles are deployed?" She texted back 12 minutes later, $900,000 annually at current property rates. Could push $1.1 million with full occupancy optimization. He set the phone down. Nearly $1 million a year, moving through a structure built on donated church property, managed from a rear parking lot, administered by a 28-year-old in an open-collar shirt who parked his pickup with the Shores Property Solutions magnet facing outward like a man with nothing to hide because all the hiding was structural and invisible. He closed the laptop. He needed to see Kyle Shores operate in person. Not from a service road through a palmetto stand. In person, in the environment where Kyle Shores was Kyle Shores rather than a figure with a clipboard and a 7-minute phone call. He opened the church website and went back through the programming calendar. The website listed Sunday services at 8, 10, and 12. Between the 10 and 12 services, in the window from approximately 11:15 to 11:45, the campus ran what it called a ministry fair in the main lobby area. Booths staffed by ministry program representatives, available every Sunday for congregants to learn about programs, sign up for volunteer opportunities, ask questions. The RV Ministry for the Faithful had a listed presence at the ministry fair. He looked at this for a long time. Then he looked at the outreach section of the staff directory and at Kyle Shores' title, Director of Community Partnerships. Kyle ran the ministry fair booth. Kyle staffed it himself. He was in the main lobby of Covenant of Grace every Sunday between services, at a booth with a banner, available to talk to anyone who walked up. Gumbo looked at this and thought about the audacity of it. The specific, confident ease of a man who had constructed something that was working and had decided the safest place to stand was directly inside the institution he was using. Not behind it, not at a remove. At a booth. In the lobby. With a banner. He wrote, Sunday. Ministry Fair. 11:15. He drove back to Cedar Key Friday afternoon because he needed the severance package the way some people needed a bar and some people needed a run, not for what it gave him but for what it didn't ask of him. He needed 2 days of the boat and the harbor, and Pete on the piling, and Renata's saffron broth, and the composition book, open to pages that weren't filling up with things he was trying to figure out. He got back to the marina at 4. Deanne lifted a hand from the marina office window when he pulled in. Pete was on the piling and turned his head when the Jeep door opened, and then turned it back to the harbor in the manner of a creature expressing measured disapproval of the length of the absence without dignifying it with direct eye contact. He's been fine, Deanne called from the office doorway. He ate well. He had opinions about the kayak rental situation on Wednesday, but nothing came of it. What situation? Couple rented kayaks and got turned around in the channel and ended up in Pete's general area. He expressed himself. She paused. They gave the kayaks back early. Gumbo looked at Pete. Pete looked at the harbor. Good, Gumbo said. He went aboard and sat on the stern and opened a Yingling and let the harbor do what it did. The evening was coming in over the gulf, the sky going the color of something you couldn't name in English but would recognize as a physical response in your chest. The composition book was on the stern table. He didn't open it. He called his daughter from the stern at 6:30. She was in Columbus, at her apartment making dinner. He could hear the specific acoustic of her kitchen, the exhaust fan, the radio she kept on at low volume because she'd grown up in a house where the radio was always on at low volume, because that was what he did. "Dad," she said, "it's Friday." "I know it's Friday. You call Sunday evenings." "I know when I call." He watched a brown pelican, not Pete, a different one, a transient without Pete's specific quality of proprietary interest in slip 12, land on the channel marker at the end of the marina. "I was thinking about Grandpa Gerald." A pause from her end. The exhaust fan running. "Yeah. Did I ever tell you about the afternoon I drove him home from the OSU game? The one in November, the year before he retired. You drove him home, and he fell asleep in the car, and you sat in the driveway for 40 minutes because you didn't want to wake him up." "He looked tired," Gumbo said. "You told me that story on the drive to the funeral," she said. "And twice since." A pause, not unkind. "You thinking about him a lot lately?" "Some." He looked at the channel marker. The transient pelican spread its wings once and settled them back. "I've been around. I've been doing a case that involves a grief group. Real people. Real losses." "Are you in the group?" "Adjacent to it." "That sounds uncomfortable." "It's been," he looked for the word, "clarifying." "In what way clarifying?" He thought about Dave and the foundation pour. About Eunice and her hand coming back empty. About Gerald in the football polo, who didn't know what he was for. In the way where you see other people's version of the thing, and it helps you understand your own version, he said. Even though your versions aren't the same. "Dad," she said, with the quiet directness she'd inherited from someone he'd always suspected from her mother, but had recently begun to think might be from him. "Are you doing all right?" "Getting better at it," he said. Which was true. "How are you?" She told him. He listened. She was doing well. The job was good. She was training for a half marathon. She'd been seeing someone new for 6 weeks who she described as thoughtful and a good cook, and not in procurement, the last of which she said with the particular daughter humor of someone who had watched the procurement world drain her father slowly for 28 years and considered his departure from it one of the more important things that had happened to him. She wasn't wrong. He said goodbye at 7 and went below and made a cast iron skillet situation with the grouper Renata had left in a cooler on the dock, butter, garlic, lemon, capers, and ate it at the galley table with the composition book closed and the radio on at low volume. He slept well. He drove back up Sunday morning. The 10 o'clock service at Covenant of Grace let out at 11:12 by his watch. He was in the main parking lot by 11, in the Jeep, watching the congregation disperse between services. It was a large congregation. The lot held 800 cars comfortably, and was running close to capacity for the 10 o'clock, families and couples and individuals flowing out of the main sanctuary doors into the Florida morning. Well-dressed without being formal. The specific demographic of a successful Pasco County megachurch. The 30s and 40s family block, the recently retired, the established middle class and upper middle class, who had found here a combination of community and aspiration and genuine spiritual need, all of which the building served with evident competence. He went in at 11:15. The lobby was large, the full glass front wall of the sanctuary, soaring ceiling, the kind of space that communicated abundance without ostentation, abundance in service of something rather than for its own sake. The coffee cafe, Grounds for Hope, was open and busy, a line of 8 people, and around the perimeter of the lobby a series of banners on stands marked the ministry fair booths. He counted 11 booths: youth ministry, women's ministry, men's ministry, Covenant Kids, missions, the food pantry, prison ministry, a senior outreach called Silver Grace, a financial counseling program, a community garden, and at the far end near the East Corridor entrance a banner in burgundy and silver, the colors, he noted, of a 2021 Tiffin Allegro bus that read, RV Ministry for the Faithful, bringing the church to where it's needed most. Kyle Shores stood behind the table. He was taller than Gumbo had estimated from the photograph and the service road sightings, 6'1", maybe 6'2", with the physical ease of someone who was comfortable in his body and in the room and in the transaction of meeting strangers. He wore a blue blazer over a white shirt open at the collar, no tie, dress trousers. The blazer was good. Not the off-the-rack quality of the rest of the staff's Sunday presentation, but something fitted and considered. He was talking to a couple in their 50s, both leaning in, both nodding, and his hands were moving in the particular way of someone who understood that physical gesture was part of persuasion, that the body made the room larger and the listener more present. Gumbo got a coffee from Grounds for Hope and stood near the financial counseling booth and watched. The couple at the RV Ministry booth were nodding more now. The woman was asking something, and Kyle was responding to it with his full face, not just words but attention, the performed intimacy of a man who gave you his complete focus for the duration of the conversation and made you feel, in that duration, that your question was the best question he'd heard all week. The couple had a brochure now. Kyle had handed it to them with both hands, which was a salesperson's move dressed as a gesture of respect. 3 minutes later, the couple left. Kyle watched them go with a brief, satisfied look that vanished before anyone else caught it. Then his eyes moved across the lobby with the instinctive sweep of a man who managed environments and was always doing a quick inventory of them. They found Gumbo. Gumbo was looking at the financial counseling banner. When he looked back, Kyle was still watching him, not suspiciously, just with the attentive assessment of a man who categorized people automatically and was deciding which category Gumbo fell into. Gumbo walked toward the RV Ministry booth. Kyle's face opened into the full presentation before Gumbo reached him, the warmth on, the posture forward, the specific social machinery of a man who had learned to perform welcome so thoroughly that it appeared natural. Perhaps it was natural. Gumbo had been reading people for 28 years, and the genuine article and the performance were not always distinguishable from the outside. Good morning. Kyle extended his hand. The grip was firm, held a beat longer than a standard handshake, the slight additional pressure that said, I am giving you my full attention. Kyle Shores. You enjoying the service today? Just visiting, Gumbo said. He shook the hand and let his own be unremarkable. Saw the booth. I've got a fifth wheel, I'm not using much. Something in Kyle's posture shifted, not visibly, not to anyone watching from a distance, but Gumbo was 3 feet away, and he caught the adjustment, the slight forward lean that happened when a topic he was interested in arrived. Really? What year? 2020. Keystone, Montana. 500 series. Beautiful units. Kyle said it with the ease of someone who knew the product line. How long have you had it? 3 years. It's been sitting since my wife and I. He let that trail off and looked at the banner. We used to do the summer trip every year. The Keys up through Georgia, the Smokies. Haven't taken it out in 2 years. I'm sorry to hear that. Kyle's voice adjusted to the lower register without losing its warmth, the natural bandwidth management of a skilled social operator. The ministry is, what we do is give these vehicles a purpose while they're not being used. Mission trips, youth retreats, community outreach in rural areas that don't have church infrastructure. Your RV isn't sitting, it's serving. Gumbo looked at the brochure Kyle had placed on the table in front of him. The design was professional, the burgundy and silver color scheme, a photograph of a Class A on a dirt road in what appeared to be rural Appalachia, a tagline, your vehicle. God's road. Their lives changed. Inside, the donation terms, 12-month agreement, church maintained, returned in good working order. Same terms Beverly Sutton had signed. 12 months, Gumbo said. That's a long commitment. The mission trips run on a seasonal calendar. We need the vehicles available across the full year to serve all the programmatic needs. Kyle said programmatic needs with the smooth fluency of someone who had assembled this language carefully enough that it came out sounding spontaneous. A lot of our donors find the year goes quickly, and at the end of it, they feel genuinely connected to what the church is doing out in the world. What happens if I need it back early? Family situation, something comes up. We work with donors individually. It hasn't come up. Kyle paused. We take very good care of the vehicles. Better, frankly, than most RV owners take care of them sitting in a driveway. A small, easy smile. Professional maintenance, regular inspections. You'd get it back in better shape than you gave it. Gumbo nodded at this slowly, the nod of a man being persuaded, moving through the stages of a decision at the pace Kyle was managing. He looked at the brochure. He looked at the banner. He looked at Kyle with the open, slightly unfocused expression of a man who was thinking about his fifth wheel and his dead marriage and the trips he wasn't taking anymore. I'd want to see the paperwork, he said, before I decided. Absolutely. Kyle reached under the table and produced a folder, clean and tabbed. He placed it on the table and opened to the first document, the ministry agreement, the same 3-page form with the Covenant of Grace letterhead and the gold cross watermark. Take this home, read it through, talk to your attorney if you want. We don't rush anyone. We don't rush anyone, said by a man who had just managed a 6-minute conversion from stranger to prospective donor with the efficiency of someone who did this 11 to 11:40 every Sunday. Gumbo took the folder. He looked at the signature line on the agreement. Director of Community Partnerships, Covenant of Grace Fellowship. You're on staff here, he said. Going on 18 months. Best decision I ever made. The brightness in the forward lean again. I've been in property development and hospitality consulting. He said this with the easy openness of a man disclosing something he had nothing to hide about. And I felt called to bring those skills to the church's mission work. It's been incredibly fulfilling. Property development and hospitality consulting. A man who disclosed the thing he needed to disclose before you asked about it, so that disclosure became transparency rather than exposure. That's great, Gumbo said. He picked up the folder. I'll read through it. Take your time. Kyle handed him a business card from the table's card holder. 2 cards, Gumbo noted. One with the Covenant of Grace logo and the Director of Community Partnerships title, and 1 plain white card with Kyle Shores and a phone number and Shores Property Solutions in small sans serif below the name. He offered both. The move was so practiced it was nearly invisible, the institutional card and the private card together, establishing 2 channels of contact without making the second one seem irregular. Most people would take both and not register the distinction. Gumbo took both. He registered the distinction. See you soon, Kyle said. He wouldn't. Gumbo walked out through the lobby glass doors into the parking lot and sat in the Jeep and put both cards on the dash and looked at the plain white one. Kyle Shores. Shores Property Solutions. Given at a church ministry booth. On a Sunday morning. In full view of 4,000 congregants. The audacity of it had a quality Gumbo recognized. Not criminal recklessness, but the specific confidence of a man who had run the numbers and determined that the structure was sound. The LLC nesting, the clean separation between the ministry and the revenue, the management contacts spread across platforms, the separate email domains that almost matched. He'd built a machine that was nearly invisible from the institutional side. The church saw a ministry. The donors saw a calling. The rental guests saw beautiful waterfront properties with luxury motorhome amenities. Only the HGTV camera had seen the pinstripe. He started the Jeep. He was halfway out of the parking lot when he saw it. The same white pickup, the Shores Property Solutions magnetic door sign, parked in the staff lot at the east side of the building. Except today there was a second vehicle next to it, a cargo van with no markings. And two men Gumbo didn't recognize were transferring boxes from the van into the back of the pickup. Kyle wasn't there. The men were working quickly, the way people worked when they were working in a window of time that had a fixed close. He pulled over on the service road and raised his phone and got 4 shots before the van's doors closed. He looked at the photographs. The boxes were white, medium-sized, uniform. The men were in their 30s, nondescript, dressed for work rather than church. The transfer took 9 minutes by his count. He enlarged the last photograph and looked at the boxes. No visible labeling, except a small printed sticker on the side of the top box in the stack closest to the camera. He enlarged it further. The resolution wasn't perfect, but the text was readable. Coastal Premier Timeshare Group, Member Welcome Package. He lowered the phone. He looked at the service road, and the van pulling out, and the white pickup sitting with its cargo covered and its magnetic sign facing the empty space where the van had been. He picked up the composition book and opened it to a new page and wrote at the top, Coastal Premier Timeshare Group. Under it, from the same parking lot. On Sundays. While Kyle is inside, running the ministry fair booth. He sat with this for a moment. He wrote the RV scam and a timeshare operation. Running simultaneously. Different products, same parking lot, same operator. He underlined same operator and put 2 question marks after it. He wasn't certain yet. The pickup was Kyle's. The men were unknown. Kyle had been inside. But the Shores Property Solutions sign was on the truck. He called Francine from the service road. Coastal Premier Timeshare Group, he said when she answered. Find it. Hello to you too. He heard her keyboard already. COASTAL. Yes. Timeshare. Probably a Florida entity. 30 seconds of keyboard. Secretary of State has it. Coastal Premier Timeshare Group LLC, registered in Florida, Orange County. Formed 16 months ago. A pause. Registered agent is a formation service in Orlando. Another pause, longer. The managing member is listed as KMS Holdings LLC. KMS Holdings. Kyle Michael Shores. He's running a timeshare operation out of a church parking lot on Sunday mornings, Gumbo said. While he's inside the church, staffing a ministry booth. While his people do the groundwork, Francine said. The boxes, member welcome packages. That's how timeshare scams work. They sell the package up front, the membership, the access fees. The boxes are what you get when you pay. A folder of materials, some branded merchandise, maybe a cheap weekend stay that's almost impossible to book. How many members can you sell in a church parking lot on a Sunday morning? How long has the company been registered? 16 months. And how many people go to Covenant of Grace? Gumbo looked at the service road and the Palmetto stand and the rear lot. 3,000 families. 16 months. Church parking lot with a captive audience between services. He's running 2 separate scams off the same foundation, he said. The RV ministry takes the vehicles. The timeshare operation takes the money. Different victims, different products, same infrastructure. Same church, Francine said. Same church, he said. And Donnie Shores doesn't know. He said it this time without the question mark. He was almost certain. Almost. He drove back to the Holiday Inn Express and ordered the pizza again, from the same place with the hand-painted sign. Same order. It arrived in 18 minutes instead of 20. He noted the improvement. He ate the pizza and looked at the composition book. He wrote at the top of the new page, "What does Kyle Shores actually want?" Not the money. The money was instrumental. 28 years in procurement had taught him that people who built elaborate structures to extract money from institutions were rarely primarily interested in the money. The money was how you kept score. What they were actually playing for was something else. He thought about Kyle at the ministry fair booth. The blazer, the full attention, the two cards offered simultaneously. The operational precision of the RV fleet, the LLC nesting, the parallel timeshare business running in the same window. He thought about the 7-minute phone call at the motorhome, the short, easy laugh. He wrote, "He's playing a game he thinks only he can see." Under it, he's probably right. Until he isn't. He closed the book. He looked at the plain white business card on the nightstand where he'd put it when he came in. Kyle Shores. Shores Property Solutions. He picked it up and looked at it for a long moment. Then he put it in the composition book's inside cover pocket, where he kept things he was going to use. Tuesday was 3 days away. He had a grief group to attend, and a pastor's son to keep watching, and 3 families from the group he didn't yet know were defrauded but was beginning to suspect he'd find there too, because the machine was running, and machines didn't stop until something stopped them. And in Land O'Lakes, Pasco County, Florida, on a Sunday morning with 4,000 people in the parking lot, Kyle Shores had apparently determined that nothing was going to stop him. Gumbo turned off the light. He thought about the audacity of it for a while in the dark. Then he went to sleep. Chapter 4. The second Tuesday group was smaller by 2. The older couple, Bob and Linda, weren't there, which Gumbo noted without reading into it, because people came and went from groups like this on schedules governed by things nobody announced, and larger by 1. A man in his early 60s, Gumbo hadn't seen before, sitting in the chair that Bob had occupied the week before, wearing a short-sleeved dress shirt with a Covenant of Grace logo embroidered on the chest. Not staff. The logo was the member version, the kind the church sold in the bookstore. But he wore it the way people wore institutional logos when the institution was load-bearing for them, not as a shirt but as an identification. Mike Alderman opened the group the same way he'd opened it the previous week. The ritual of it was the point. Gumbo understood now. The same welcome, the same statement of purpose, the same reminder about confidentiality. The repetition was a container. You knew what the container was, so you could put things in it. The new man's name was Robert. He was 62, and he had lost his wife 14 months ago, ovarian cancer 18 months from diagnosis. He said this with the practiced brevity of a man who had said it many times and had reduced it to its minimum structure, because the minimum structure was what he could carry into a room full of strangers. "I kept thinking I was ready," Robert said. "Every stage they told me about, I thought, okay, now I know what's coming, I can prepare. Bargaining, anger, depression. I prepared for all of it." He looked at his hands. What I wasn't prepared for was how quiet the house got. Not sad quiet. Just quiet. Like the volume had been turned down on everything, and I didn't know where the knob was. Lorraine nodded at this from across the circle, with the recognition of someone who had the same knob problem and had been looking for it for 7 months. Gerald, in his football polo, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "I know that quiet," he said. "I retired 18 months ago, and I keep thinking it's the same quiet." He paused. "My wife's right there in the house. But the quiet is," he looked at Robert. "Yeah." Something passed between them, the specific recognition of two men who had arrived at the same condition through different roads and were slightly relieved to find someone else on the same road. Gumbo looked at his coffee. He was thinking about what Francine had told him that morning, which he'd been carrying since 9 a.m., and which had changed the texture of sitting in this room. Francine had called at 9:15. "I ran the Coastal Premier Timeshare Group registrations through the Consumer Complaint Database," she'd said. "Florida AG's office keeps a public log of complaints filed against timeshare operators. Coastal Premier has 11 complaints in 14 months. 9 of them are from Pasco County or adjacent counties. 3 of those 9 complainants," she'd stopped, and the stop had had something in it. "Tell me," he'd said. "I cross-referenced the complainant names against the Covenant of Grace membership directory. I got that from their online giving portal. If you register for online tithing, your name goes in the member directory. It's publicly searchable. 3 complainants are church members." 3 complainants are church members, she'd confirmed. A woman named Lorraine Castellano, a man named Gerald Huff, and a couple, a Bob and Linda Marchetti. He'd sat with that for a moment. Lorraine, Gerald, Bob and Linda. "The Marchettis," he'd said. "Bob and Linda Marchetti." "Yes. Beverly Sutton told me about a Marchetti family. They donated a Class C motorhome to the RV ministry." "Same family," Francine had said. "Bob and Linda Marchetti donated a 2019 Thor Magnitude to the RV ministry for the faithful. And 6 months later, they bought a Coastal Premier timeshare package. Both scams. Same family. $8,000 for the timeshare package. That's the entry-level membership the complaint describes. They paid it and got a welcome box and a membership card and a booking portal that returned no available dates for any property they tried to book." "How much did Lorraine pay?" $6,500. Gerald Huff, $4,000, which is the lowest tier package. He'd looked at the composition book, at the circle of names he'd been sitting with every Tuesday evening, the ones he'd been listening to and carrying home with him and thinking about on the boat. "Gumbo," Francine had said. "Yeah. You know these people." "I know them a little." "That's enough to make it complicated." "It's already complicated." He'd looked at the composition book. Kyle sold them timeshares and took their RV. In the same institution. From people who were going to a grief group in the building next door. Whether he targeted the grief group specifically, or whether it was incidental, doesn't matter, Gumbo had said. The result is the same. The group ran until 8:40. Afterward, at the coffee station, Gumbo found himself next to Gerald Huff, who was pouring decaf and looking at it with mild suspicion. "The decaf, any good here?" Gerald said. "Better than the regular," Gumbo said, which wasn't true, but was the answer for a man who had chosen decaf at 8:30 and didn't need additional discouragement. Gerald poured it. He held the cup and looked at it. "That thing you said last week," he said. "About the conference call." "Yeah. I've been thinking about it all week." He drank some decaf. The specific moment you didn't leave. I keep doing that with the day I retired. Running it back. Finding the moment I should have said something different about what was going to happen afterward. What would you have said?" Gerald looked at his boots. Not ostrich, the regular kind, worn in, the boots of a man who had worked on job sites for 34 years and had kept the habit of the footwear after the sites were gone. "I don't know. Maybe just, I'm not ready for this to be what I am." He paused. "Is it too late to not retire?" "I don't think retirement works like that." "No," Gerald said. He drank more decaf. "I did something stupid a few months ago. My wife's been mad at me about it. He said this with the careful tone of a man who had assessed the size of his mistake and wasn't sure the assessment was complete. I bought into a timeshare situation. One of those vacation club things. $4,000. Gumbo kept his face still. The church, I know this sounds, Gerald looked at his cup. Kyle Shores, the outreach director, he had a booth one Sunday. Coastal Premier, the vacation club. I figured, church member, church staff, the money goes to the right place. He shook his head. I've been in business 34 years. I know better. Has it gone anywhere? The timeshare? We tried to book something in April. Nothing available. The portal doesn't work half the time. Gerald looked at his boots again. $4,000. My wife, she didn't say I told you so. She just got quiet. He paused. The quiet is worse than the other thing. Have you complained to anyone? I filed something with the state. Consumer complaint. I don't know if anything comes of it. He looked up at Gumbo with the direct, measuring look of a man who had run a company and hired people and was doing the appraisal now. You're not just here for the group, he said. Gumbo held the look. What I told you stays in this room, he said. That's how the group works. Gerald looked at him for a moment. Yeah, he said. That's how it works. He put his cup in the recycling. See you next Tuesday, Gumbo. He walked out. Gumbo stood at the coffee station and looked at the bulletin board and the lost cat notice that had been there both Tuesdays and the child's crayon drawing, "We are okay." He needed to talk to Donnie Shores. He called Beverly Sutton from the parking lot. I need to meet with Pastor Donnie, he said. I need you to get me into a meeting with him. Private. No staff, no security team. A long pause. How would I do that? You've been a member for 11 years. You make a direct request to his personal assistant for a pastoral counseling appointment. You say it's a personal matter involving your family and your faith, and you need to speak with the pastor directly. He paused. Can you do that without Randy knowing? Another pause. Randy is at a job site in Lutz on Wednesdays. I can be at the church at 9. Wednesday morning. Text me when it's confirmed. He started to hang up. Mr. Malone, Beverly said. Gumbo. How bad is it? He looked at the cross on the sanctuary roofline, lit against the night. The RV operation is one part of it, he said. There's more. I'll explain when I know the full shape. Is Pastor Donnie involved? That's what Wednesday will tell us, he said. He hung up. Beverly's text came at 8:15 Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. confirmed. He thinks it's me coming alone. I'll meet you in the lobby. He wore the blue Marlins. He'd stood in the Holiday Inn bathroom, looking at the two shirts, and decided the blue Marlins were the right choice for a meeting with a senior pastor in a Wednesday morning context, which was a level of shirt analysis he hadn't anticipated developing, and yet here he was. Beverly Sutton was 58, and looked like a woman who had spent 58 years being competent in situations that didn't reward competence, which was most situations. She was medium height, dark-haired, going silver at the temples in the way she'd clearly decided not to fight, dressed in a blazer and slacks that said, I am serious about this conversation, without saying I am dressed for church. She met him in the lobby at 8:55 and shook his hand with the grip of someone who had been waiting 3 weeks to do something productive about the problem. His assistant's name is Marta, Beverly said quietly, walking him toward the corridor. She's been with him 12 years. She's protective but fair. Does Marta know Kyle well? Beverly glanced at him. Better than most. She's been there through Kyle's hole. Kyle has a complicated history with the church. He wasn't always on staff. He left for several years in his 20s. She paused. There was a period where Donnie and Kyle weren't speaking. I don't know the details. Kyle came back about 2 years ago and patched things up and joined the staff. Donnie was very publicly glad about it. He talked about the prodigal son from the pulpit. Gumbo filed this. The prodigal son. Kyle returning to the church after years away. Donnie publicly celebrating the reconciliation. A father who wanted his son back badly enough to give him a staff position and a platform. He wrote none of it. He carried it. Donnie Shores's office was in the administrative wing, past Marta's anteroom, and through a door that was solid wood in a building that was otherwise mostly glass and drywall. A deliberate architectural statement about the weight of what happened on the other side of it. The office was large but not ostentatious. A desk, 2 chairs opposite it, a seating area with a couch and 2 armchairs, bookshelves floor to ceiling on one wall, framed photographs on another. A credenza with a coffee service. Donnie Shores came around the desk when they entered. He was taller than his photographs suggested, 6 feet, straight, the posture of a man who had stood at podiums for 30 years and had learned that posture was its own communication. The silver hair was exactly as the photograph showed, the face with its camera-ready quality of sincerity, the eyes that caught you and held. He saw Gumbo, and the slight adjustment happened, the recalibration of a man who had been expecting Beverly alone and was now encountering Beverly plus a large man in a Hawaiian shirt who was carrying a composition book. Beverly. He took her hand in both of his. I'm glad you came. He looked at Gumbo with the warm, appraising openness of a man who had welcomed strangers his entire adult life and had systematized the welcome. And this is? Gumbo Malone, Gumbo said. I'm a private investigator. Beverly hired me 3 weeks ago. I need to talk to you about your son. The warmth stayed on Donnie Shores's face for exactly 2 seconds after Gumbo finished the sentence. Then it went somewhere else. Not hostility, something quieter and more interior. The face of a man receiving news he had been unconsciously bracing for without knowing what form it would take. Sit down, he said. His voice was steady. He went back around the desk and sat in his chair, and Gumbo understood that the desk between them was intentional. He needed the structure while he listened. Gumbo sat. Beverly sat beside him. He opened the composition book to the summary page he'd prepared that morning. Not to read from it, but to have it organized in front of him, because organized presentation was how you got through the next 40 minutes without losing anyone. He laid it out. The RV Ministry for the Faithful, the signed donation agreements, the ministry fleet of 6 vehicles. The 3 rental properties, Pelican's Reach, Marsh Hen Cottage, Blue Heron Landing. The revenue estimates. Shores Property Solutions, the LLC structure, KMS Holdings, the Delaware entities. The Sunday morning timeshare operation in the East parking lot. Coastal Premier Timeshare Group, 11 AG complaints, 3 of the complainants church members, 2 of them also RV ministry donors. He spoke for 11 minutes. He kept it factual and sequential. He showed Donnie the photographs, the canopy, the staff polo employee doing the fleet walk, Kyle at the rear lot with his phone, the cargo van transfer, the boxes with the Coastal Premier sticker. Donnie Shores sat behind the desk and listened to all of it without speaking. When Gumbo finished, Donnie was quiet for a long time. The office clock made its small sounds. Somewhere in the administrative wing, a phone rang and was answered by Marta. Then Donnie Shores put his elbows on the desk and his face in his hands and stayed there. Beverly looked at Gumbo. Gumbo waited. Donnie took his face out of his hands. His eyes were dry, but the territory around them had changed. Something had gone through there and left a mark. The ministry paperwork, he said. I saw the program proposal. Kyle brought it to me, as an outreach initiative. It was well constructed. Vehicle-based ministry has a long tradition. We've done tent revivals, food truck outreach, mobile medical clinics. He looked at his desk. I read the proposal, and I thought, this is Kyle using the skills he has for something that matters. A pause. I approved it in a staff meeting. The whole staff was there. Mike Alderman, Susan Park, the whole team. It went in the program directory. Were you shown the donation agreements? The draft, yes. Kyle said he'd handle the donor relations for the program, since he had hospitality and property management experience. Donnie paused. I thought it made sense. A ministry should be run by someone who knows operations. And the revenue from the vehicles? There was no revenue discussed. Kyle presented it as a stewardship program, church members donating use of assets they weren't using. No money changing hands. He looked at the photographs on the desk. The church has no financial relationship with what you're describing. No, Gumbo said. That was the design. Another silence. Donnie picked up the photograph of Kyle at the rear lot. Gumbo had printed it and brought a set, because he'd learned that physical photographs were more real to people than phone screens in a meeting like this. He came back 2 years ago, Donnie said. He set it to the photograph, rather than to Gumbo or Beverly. Kyle has made choices in his life that I found difficult. In his 20s, he was involved in some real estate ventures that went badly. There were investors who lost money. Nothing criminal, nothing that was prosecuted, but the circumstances were, he set the photograph down. I told him when he came back that the church could be a new start. That he could take what he was good at and put it in service of something larger than himself. A pause. I said it from the pulpit. The prodigal son. He came back to the church 2 months before he registered Shore's Property Solutions, Gumbo said, and launched the RV ministry 2 months after he joined the staff. Donnie looked at him. He planned it before he came back, Gumbo said. Not unkindly. Just the fact, placed on the desk between them where it needed to be. Donnie Shores sat with this for a full minute. The clock continued its small sounds. The families, Donnie said finally. The donors. 3 vehicle donors that Beverly knows of. There may be more. At least 3 congregation members who purchased Coastal Premier timeshares. Gumbo paused. 2 of those 3 are also vehicle donors. The same families hit twice. Who? The Marchettis. Lorraine Castellano. Gerald Huff. Donnie closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he looked at Beverly with the expression of a man who understood what it cost her to bring this here. I am so sorry, Beverly, he said. Beverly's jaw was tight. I want the RV back, Donnie. We want it back. But more than that, I need Randy to understand what happened. I need him to be able to trust his own judgment again. Donnie nodded. He picked up his desk phone. I need you to get Kyle in here, he said into it. Now. Tell him it's a family matter. He set the phone down. He looked at Gumbo. Will you stay, he said. Yes, Gumbo said. Kyle Shores arrived 11 minutes later. He came through the door with his blazer on, and the forward-leaning brightness dialed up, the presentation mode version of himself, and he was 2 steps into the room and already reading it. Gumbo, Beverly, his father behind the desk, the photographs on the desk, the composition book, when the dial turned itself off. Not all at once. Like the last time Gumbo had seen this, a flag coming down in sections. The brightness going, then the forward lean, then the social machinery, until what was left was just a 28-year-old man standing in his father's office being looked at by people who knew what he'd done. He looked at the photographs on the desk for a long moment. Then he looked at his father. Something passed between them that had the weight of things accumulated over a long time. The real estate ventures in his 20s, the investors who'd lost money, the years of not speaking, the return, the pulpit speech about the prodigal son. Gumbo was sitting 3 feet away, and he felt like he was watching something through a window. "Dad," Kyle said. "Sit down, Kyle," Donnie said. Kyle sat in the chair next to Beverly. He looked at Gumbo. The assessment was different from the ministry fare. Not categorizing a stranger now, but evaluating a threat, calculating the distance between where he was and the nearest exit that wasn't physical. "How much?" Donnie said. Kyle looked at his father. "The revenue from the properties," Donnie said. "How much?" A pause. Kyle looked at the photographs. "The 3 properties together, about $480, Kyle said. He said it with the flat quality of a man for whom the number had been abstract, until he said it out loud, and heard it in a room with his father and 2 other people. "Over 14 months. $480,000, Donnie said. "Yes. From vehicles donated by members of this congregation." Kyle said nothing. "And the timeshares?" A longer pause. "That's separate." "How separate?" "Different entity, different operation." Kyle glanced at Gumbo. "The timeshare company isn't connected to the ministry." "Except it's connected to you," Gumbo said. "And you're connected to the ministry. And the customers are connected to the church." He kept his voice level. "You sold timeshares to people who had already donated their vehicles to your rental operation. You ran both products through the same institution." Kyle looked at him with the eyes of a man who had been caught, but was still running the calculation of how caught, and what the options were from here. "The properties," Gumbo said. "The LLC structure. KMS Holdings, the Delaware entities that took time to set up. You built this before you came back to the church." Kyle said nothing. "You came back because the congregation was the supply chain," Gumbo said. "Vehicles and customers. 2,000 families. You came back because this was where the operation lived." He said it without judgment. Just the architecture described plainly. Kyle looked at his father again. Donnie Shores was looking at his son with the face of a man standing in the rubble of something he'd built carefully. Not with anger, something past anger, something that had gone through anger and come out the other side into a country that didn't have a convenient name. "I wanted," Kyle started. "Don't," Donnie said. His voice was quiet. "Don't tell me what you wanted." Kyle stopped. The room was very quiet. The clock. The distant phone. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. "The families," Donnie said. He said it to Gumbo, not to Kyle. "What do they need?" "The vehicles returned, in good condition. The timeshare payments refunded. And an explanation, a real one, not a statement, not a message from the church office, from the person responsible." Gumbo looked at Kyle. "The Marchettis lost their RV and $8,000. Lorraine Castellano lost $6,500. Gerald Huff lost $4,000. Kyle's face moved at the names. Just slightly. The first visible crack in the smooth surface. "I know those people," Kyle said. "I know you do," Gumbo said. Another silence. "Gerald Huff goes to the grief group," Kyle said. He said it quietly, to no one in particular. "Yes." "And Lorraine?" "Yes." Kyle looked at his hands. For the first time since he'd walked in the door, he looked like his age, 28, and sitting in his father's office having a specific conversation he'd probably known was coming and had told himself would never quite arrive. "Bob and Linda Marchetti lost their son," he said. 18 months ago. They come to the grief group together on Tuesdays. They weren't there this week, Gumbo said. No. Kyle kept looking at his hands. Bob called me last month about the timeshare. He stopped. He was very polite about it. He said he understood things didn't always work out, and he wasn't angry. He just wanted to understand what had happened. Gumbo waited. I told him I'd look into it, Kyle said. I told him I was sorry for the confusion. He looked up at his father. I'd already started moving the properties, transferring management. Donnie's eyes went to Gumbo. He was shutting down before you were hired, Gumbo said to Beverly. Moving the pieces. He would have been gone within another month. Beverly looked at Kyle with the expression of a woman who had been imagining this moment for 3 weeks and had prepared several versions of it and found the real one different from all of them. You were going to take our RV back to us and say thank you for your ministry participation and drive away, she said. Kyle said nothing. My husband thinks Pastor Donnie wouldn't do something like this, Beverly said. He's right. But you did something like this using his name and his church and his congregation and she stopped. Randy has given 11 years to this church. His time, his money, his loyalty. And you used that. You specifically used that. The room held this. Yes, Kyle said. It was the only honest syllable he'd produced since walking through the door, and it landed in the room like a stone in still water, the ripples going out and out. Donnie Shores stood up from behind his desk. Kyle, he said, you're going to need an attorney. He walked to the door and opened it. Marta is going to call ours. You'll sit with him this afternoon, and you'll tell him everything. Every property, every LLC, every donor, every Coastal Premier customer. He held the door. Every dollar. Kyle stood. At the door he paused and looked back at the room, at Gumbo, at Beverly, at his father holding the door open with the expression of a man executing a decision that was costing him something he'd spent 2 years rebuilding. Then he walked out. Donnie closed the door. He stood at it for a moment with his hand on the wood. Then he turned back to the room and looked at Beverly. I will make this right with the families, he said. Every dollar. The vehicles. The timeshare refunds. Whatever legal exposure the church has from operating the ministry under false pretenses, I will address it. He looked at Gumbo. What else do they need? Gumbo thought about Gerald in his football polo, looking at his boots. About Lorraine and her beagle and the knob she couldn't find. About Bob and Linda Marchetti, who hadn't come to the group this week. The grief group, he said. Mike Alderman's group. It should keep running. Donnie looked at him. Those people came to this building because they needed somewhere to bring their losses, Gumbo said. They didn't come for the ministry fair or the timeshare booth. They came because Mike Alderman runs a good group and word got around. He paused. Whatever happens with Kyle and the properties and the legal situation, the group keeps running. Donnie held his gaze for a moment. Yes, he said. It does. He walked Beverly out through the lobby. The morning service was long over, the lobby empty, the grounds for Hope Cafe between rushes. The ministry fair banners were still up from Sunday, the booths folded and stacked against the wall. The RV ministry banner, burgundy and silver, was rolled and banded and leaning against the corridor entrance. Beverly looked at it. Randy's going to be angry, she said. Not at me. At himself for not believing me. He'll come around. He will. She paused. He's a good man. He just had a blind spot. She looked at the banner one more time. I hate that I'm right. No, you don't, Gumbo said. She almost smiled. No, she said. I don't. She walked out through the glass lobby doors into the Pasco County morning. Gumbo stood in the empty lobby for a moment. He looked at the coffee cafe. He looked at the bulletin boards with their program listings and the bookstore with its display in the window. He looked at where the ministry fair booths would be on Sunday. Kyle's booth at the East End with the burgundy and silver banner and the 2 business cards offered simultaneously. He thought about what Donnie had said. I told him the church could be a new start. The Father giving the Son the best version of an institution he'd built. The Son taking it apart from the inside with the same hands he'd been given to rebuild with. The prodigal son who had gone away and come back, and the Father who had welcomed him because that was the story. That was the story that had to be true. And the cost of the story being true was that you opened the door without knowing what walked in with it. He thought about his own father in the hospital room in March, and the Q3 conference call, and the 4 hours he'd sat in a cubicle in Columbus reviewing corrugated cardboard variants instead of being where he was supposed to be. The things you didn't do because you believed there was still time. He picked up a coffee from the grounds for Hope Station, the afternoon carafes half full, the morning's optimism still warm in them. He drank it, standing in the empty lobby of a church that was going to have a very difficult month. Then he drove back to the Holiday Inn Express and sat on the bed with the composition book open and wrote for 40 minutes straight. Not the case summary, not the evidentiary record, but the whole thing, start to finish, the way it had actually gone, which was never the way the outline suggested but was always, he'd found, more true. He wrote until his hand hurt. Then he closed the book and called Francine. Kyle is going to counsel with the church's attorney this afternoon, he said. The church will pursue full restitution for the RV donors and the timeshare customers. I need you to contact Patricia Huang, the attorney I worked with on the Hammock Cove case, and see if she has a referral for a consumer fraud attorney in Pasco County who can represent the affected families independently. The church's attorney will represent the church's interests, Francine said, which may align with the families but won't always. They need their own counsel. He paused. Beverly Sutton needs someone who's working for her and Randy, not for Donnie Shores's insurance exposure. I'll make some calls. A pause. How's Donnie? Honest, Gumbo said. Mortified and honest. He didn't know. You sure? He thought about Donnie's face when he described the program proposal, the well-constructed initiative, Kyle using his skills for something that mattered. The face of a man replaying a moment and finding in it all the things he hadn't seen. I'm sure, Gumbo said. And Kyle? Gumbo looked at the composition book. Kyle's going to need a very good attorney, he said. He's also 28 years old, and he just sat in his father's office and heard Bob and Linda Marchetti's son's name and flinched. He paused. I don't know what that means for what comes next. But it happened. Francine was quiet for a moment. You know what I'm going to say, she said. You're going to say these are real people, and I got too close. I was going to say good work, she said. The other thing too. But good work first. He looked at the Holiday Inn ceiling. There's one more Tuesday, he said. The group. Yeah. Gumbo. A pause. You don't owe them a confession. You got their money back. You kept their group running. I know, he said. I know that. He hung up. He looked at the ceiling for a while. Outside on State Route 54, the franchise corridor ran through its Wednesday afternoon operations, the same as any Wednesday, the same as any afternoon, the drive-thrus and the urgent care centers, and the storage facility next to the church with its rows of orange doors. The cross on Covenant of Grace's roofline was visible through the hotel window. He looked at it until the light changed, and the afternoon went gold, and then amber, and then the early dark of a Florida evening, the sun going fast the way it always did this time of year, no warning. Just suddenly the day was done. He had one more Tuesday. He didn't know yet what he was going to say. He'd figure it out on the drive up. Chapter 5. Kyle Shores left Florida on Thursday. Gumbo learned this from Francine, who learned it from the church's attorney, who called Beverly Sutton's newly retained consumer fraud attorney in a spirit of professional courtesy, and mentioned it the way attorneys mention things they want on record, as disclosed, briefly, without elaboration, with the calm of someone putting a date stamp on a fact before anyone could say they hadn't been told. Kyle had met with the church's attorney on Wednesday afternoon, as Donnie had directed. He'd sat for 4 hours and been forthcoming about the LLC structure, the properties, the coastal premier operation, the revenue figures. He'd signed a cooperation agreement acknowledging the facts. He'd agreed to a schedule of asset transfers and documentation delivery. Thursday morning, his apartment in Wesley Chapel was empty. His phone went to voicemail. The Shores Property Solutions magnetic sign was in the dumpster behind his building. The white pickup was in the lot at the Atlanta airport. Gumbo wrote Atlanta in the composition book and looked at it. Georgia had no extradition complications for what Kyle had done. This wasn't the kind of crime that generated a warrant, at least not yet, not before the AG's office had reviewed the consumer complaint file, and a civil case had been filed, and the wheels of Florida consumer fraud law had completed whatever rotation they were currently in the middle of. Kyle had not, technically, run. He had relocated. The distinction was legal rather than moral, but it was the kind of distinction that mattered in a process. He called Beverly. "He's gone," he said. A silence on her end. Not surprised. The silence of someone who had expected this the moment she'd heard he was going to counsel with an attorney, who had known in some practical part of her that a man who built 2 parallel scams inside a church and ran them for 14 months was not a man who sat still while the walls closed in. "The agreement he signed," she said. "Does it matter?" "It's a civil document. It documents the facts. It creates a record. Whether it produces restitution depends on whether the assets can be reached. The LLC holdings, the property management revenue, whatever's in the business accounts." He paused. "The church's attorney told your attorney the church intends to make the affected families whole from church funds pending recovery from the Kyle side assets." Donnie said that. Donnie said that. Another silence. Different quality, something working through it. "Randy talked to Donnie yesterday," Beverly said. "In Donnie's office. I don't know what was said. Randy came home and was quiet for a long time, and then he said Donnie asked him to stay involved in the church. As a deacon. That the church needed people like Randy right now." She paused. "Randy said yes." Gumbo looked at the composition book. "How do you feel about that?" he said. "I feel like Randy needs his church," Beverly said. "And I feel like the church needs people who love it for the right reasons." A pause. "And I feel like Kyle Shores is going to have a very unpleasant few years, regardless of where he's parked the pickup." "That's probably accurate," Gumbo said. "Are you going back Tuesday?" Beverly asked. To the group. He'd been thinking about this since Wednesday evening. He'd been thinking about it on the drive down Friday, on the boat over the weekend, at the stern table with the composition book, at Renata's restaurant Saturday night when he'd told her the broad version, and she'd listened with the full attention she brought to things that mattered and then said, "What are you going to do about the Tuesday part?" He'd said he didn't know. She'd said, "Yes, you do." "Yes," he told Beverly. "I'm going back Tuesday." He drove up Monday and spent the afternoon at the Holiday Inn and the evening at the pizza place with the hand-painted sign, where the counterwoman recognized him from 2 previous orders and brought the pizza out in 18 minutes without being asked, and said, "Same as usual," with the particular satisfaction of someone who liked their regulars and considered remembering their order a small professional achievement. He ate the pizza and drank a beer and looked at the composition book without opening it. He'd written in it every day of this case. Francine's calls, the surveillance notes, the LLC registrations, the spreadsheet revenue estimates, the Donnie meeting, Kyle's exit. The group members' names: Lorraine, Gerald, Robert, Dave, Priya, Eunice, the three women in their 40s, the teenager. What they'd brought into the room each Tuesday, and what the room had done with it. He'd filled 31 pages. That was more pages than most cases. He looked at the thickness of it in the book, the 31 pages slightly fatter than the blank ones behind them, and thought about what the difference in thickness meant, which was that he'd been paying attention in a specific way. He thought about what Francine had said: "You don't owe them a confession." She wasn't wrong. The restitution was coming. The group was continuing. Mike Alderman's Tuesday evenings would keep running in the Community Life Center, regardless of what happened in the civil case or the AG review or wherever Kyle Shores had parked himself in Georgia. The machine that mattered, the one Mike ran, the circle of chairs, the coffee station, Lorraine's Beagle anecdotes, and Dave's 6:30 alarm, that machine was intact. He closed the composition book without writing in it. He left a good tip and drove back to the Holiday Inn and went to sleep early for a Tuesday. He got to the Community Life Center at 6:45. The lobby was the same, the coffee station, the bulletin board, the lost cat notice that had been there every week he'd come, and which he'd decided either represented a cat that had been found by now or a cat that was gone for good, and whose owner had left the notice up because taking it down was harder than leaving it. The child's crayon drawing was still there. "We are okay." He poured a coffee and looked at the drawing for a moment. Then he went into the room. The circle was full tonight. Everyone from the previous Tuesday, plus Bob and Linda Marchetti, who were back and sitting adjacent to each other, in the way of people who had processed something difficult in the 10 days since they'd been absent, and had arrived at an agreement about how to sit with it. Bob was heavier through the shoulders than Gerald, and had the hands of a man who'd spent his life in physical work. Linda was small and careful, and sat with her purse in her lap in the way of someone who needed something to hold on to. The teenager was there again. He'd been there both previous Tuesdays with his arms crossed and his expression of required attendance, and tonight his arms were uncrossed, which was a small architectural change that Gumbo noted. Gumbo sat in his usual chair, between Lorraine and Dave, which had become his chair without announcement or negotiation, the way chairs became chairs in groups like this. Mike Alderman opened the group the same way. The ritual. The container. Robert, who had come for the first time the previous week, talked about going through his wife's closet. He'd been putting it off for 14 months. He'd done it last Saturday, with his daughter helping. He said, "We kept most of it. My daughter took some things. There were 3 dresses my wife had never worn, still had the tags, and we took those to a women's shelter, which my daughter said Mom would have wanted, and I think she's right." He paused. "The closet looks different now. I wasn't sure how I'd feel about that. I thought I'd feel worse than I do." Lorraine said, "How do you feel?" Robert looked at the question for a moment, the way you looked at something you'd put down and were picking up again carefully. "Like there's some room," he said. "I didn't know I needed room." The teenager, his name was Marcus Jr., which Gumbo had learned his name the second Tuesday when Mike had used it, said something for the first time. He said, "My mom keeps his stuff in his room. Everything exactly where it was. She won't let anyone move it." Bob and Linda looked at their son's brother across the circle. Linda said, "That's her way of keeping him." Marcus Jr. said, "I know. It's just," he stopped. His arms went to cross, and then didn't quite make it, resting on his knees instead. I keep going in there to get my basketball shoes because I left them in there before. And every time I go in, it's like, it's the same room but he's not in it. So it's not really the same room. The room held this. Bob said quietly, "No. It's not the same room." Marcus Jr. looked at his father. Something passed between them that had the quality of something that had needed to pass and hadn't found its way until now, in this room, on this particular Tuesday. Mike Alderman let it be. When he got to Gumbo, he said, "Gumbo, anything you want to share tonight?" Gumbo looked at the circle. He looked at Lorraine with her tissue folded in her hand, and the beagle named Dawn at home, getting her out of bed at a reasonable hour. At Gerald in his football polo, sitting up slightly straighter than he had the first Tuesday, not resolved but adjusted, recalibrated. At Bob and Linda, who had lost Marcus and donated their Thor magnitude and paid $8,000 for a vacation club that existed primarily on letterhead, and who were sitting in this room on a Tuesday because this room was something real in a month that had contained a number of things that were not. At Dave, who was setting a 6:30 alarm for a daughter who was gone and wouldn't stop. He said, "I should tell you something about why I'm here." The room shifted, the quality of attention changing, becoming more focused. "I'm a private investigator. I was hired to look into something connected to this church. Not the group. The group has nothing to do with it. Mike has nothing to do with it." He looked at Mike Alderman, who was watching him with the stillness of a man who had learned not to react in rooms where things were happening. "I came in through the group because it was the access point. And he stopped. "I told myself I was going in honest about the loss and lying about everything else. My father died 3 years ago, and I did talk about that honestly. That part was true." He looked at the circle. "The other part is that what I found as part of the case, involved some of you directly." He paused. "There's a restitution process underway. I don't want to go into the specifics in this room, but the people who need to know what happened are being contacted by attorneys, and the money that was taken is being addressed." Another pause. "I thought you deserved to know that the person who was sitting here asking you about your grief was doing other things, and that I'm sorry that those two things were happening at the same time." The room was quiet. Lorraine looked at him. "The timeshare," she said. "Yes." "You found that?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, the nod of a woman processing. "I knew it was wrong when I bought it," she said. "I told myself church safe. Don always said I had good instincts, and I ignored them." She looked at her hands. $6,500 isn't?" She paused. "It's not nothing. It's also not the thing I came here for." She looked at Gumbo. "The group helped me. Whatever else was happening." Gerald was looking at his boots. Then he looked up. "The group is keeping running," he said. "Mike's group?" "Yes," Gumbo said. Gerald nodded. "Okay," he said. "Not a forgiveness, just an assessment." A man who had run a company for 34 years updating his information and determining what was actionable and what wasn't. "Okay." Bob Marchetti was looking at Gumbo with the particular expression of a man who had been deceived twice in the same institution and was deciding what to do with the third version of it, which was this: a pie in a Hawaiian shirt sitting in a grief circle telling the truth after the fact. "The RV," Bob said. "Coming back. The church is coordinating the transfer." Bob nodded. He looked at Linda. She looked at her purse. Then she looked at Gumbo with the careful brown eyes of a woman who had lost her son, and her vacation club membership, and her motorhome in the same 18 months, and had still shown up to a Tuesday night grief group, which told you something about what she was made of. "Will you come back?" she said. "After this?" The question surprised him. Not the content, but the direction of it. Not an accusation, but a genuine question. Asked in the same spirit the room asked all its genuine questions, which was without knowing the answer and being willing to hear whatever came. "I don't know," he said. Which was true. Mike Alderman said quietly, "You're welcome if you do." After the group, Gumbo stood at the coffee station, and Dave came and stood next to him, and they did the same thing they'd done the first Tuesday. Stood next to each other and didn't talk for a moment, the specific, comfortable silence of two men who had established the terms of their understanding of each other and didn't need to renegotiate them. Then Dave said, "My daughter's name was Casey." Gumbo looked at him. "I realized I never said her name. In the group. I said my daughter." Dave poured a coffee he didn't need. "Casey. That's a good name," Gumbo said. "She picked it herself. She went by it starting at 14. Her given name was Catherine." He looked at the cup. "I called her Casey from 14 on and never thought about it twice." He paused. "I still set the alarm. I don't think I'm going to stop." "You don't have to," Gumbo said. Dave looked at him. "What was your dad's name?" "Gerald," Gumbo said. "Gerald Malone." "That's funny," Dave said. "There's a Gerald in the group." "I noticed." Dave almost smiled. It wasn't quite there, but it was in the neighborhood. And in a grief group on a Tuesday evening in Pasco County, that was the right neighborhood to be in. "See you Tuesday," Dave said. "Maybe," Gumbo said. "Honest?" Dave nodded. He walked out. Lorraine caught him at the door. "The attorney," she said. "The one handling the restitution. Is she good?" "She's very good. Her name is Dana Whitfield. She practices in Newport Richey. She has 8 years of consumer fraud." He paused. "She knows the specifics of your complaint. She'll call you this week." 8 years. Lorraine considered this. Don would have wanted to know her entire resume. Would that have been quick? Don was thorough. She said it with the particular mix of exasperation and love that appeared to be the dominant weather system of their 41 years. "He would have liked you, I think." "Yeah." He liked people who were direct. She tilted her head. Even when they were also doing other things. He looked at her. "Gumbo," she said. "I've been in this group for 4 months. I've watched 12 different people try to be honest in this room and fail in 12 different ways and succeed in 12 different ways, and the one thing Mike always says is that the attempt counts." She paused. "You attempted." She walked out through the lobby glass doors into the parking lot. He stood at the door and watched her go, and thought that Don Castellano had been right about his wife's instincts, whatever she thought about the timeshare. He drove south out of Land O'Lakes at 9:15. He went through the intersection at State Route 54 and past the Planet Fitness and the storage facility and the Covenant of Grace entrance with its lollipop crepe myrtles lit by the boulevard lights, the cross on the roofline visible and steady. He passed Grounds for Hope, dark now, the cafe windows black. He passed the east parking lot where the white pickup had sat on Sunday mornings with its magnetic sign and its cargo of welcome packages. He thought about Kyle Shores somewhere in Georgia with his father's jaw and his forward-leaning brightness, and the 7-minute phone call where he'd laughed his short, easy laugh next to the motorhome he'd been renting at $800 a night for 14 months. He thought about what Kyle had said in his father's office, "I know those people." He thought about the flinch. He didn't know what the flinch meant for what came next. He still didn't know. Maybe Kyle knew, in some functioning part of himself, that the operational machinery hadn't reached, that the people in the grief group building were the wrong people to take from. Maybe that knowledge had been there the whole time, under the LLC structures and the property listings, and the burgundy and silver banner, and had just never been loud enough to change anything until it was too late. Or maybe the flinch was just a face doing what faces did when you said the names of people out loud in a room where you had to sit with what you'd done. He didn't know. He took the on-ramp to the Suncoast Parkway and let the Jeep find its speed on the open road, the Wednesday night traffic thin, the flat Florida darkness on both sides of the highway with the occasional phosphorescent billboard breaking it like punctuation. At the State Route 52 rest stop, he pulled over and sat with the engine running. He opened the composition book to a blank page. He wrote, "Kyle Shores flinched when I said their names. I don't know what that means." He looked at it. Then he wrote, "Maybe it doesn't matter what it means. It happened." He wrote, "Dave's daughter was Casey. Gerald Malone. Gerald the contractor doesn't know what he's for yet, but he's sitting up straighter." He wrote, "Lorraine said the attempt counts." He closed the book. He pulled back onto the Suncoast Parkway and drove south toward the turnpike and then west on the toll 589 extension and then down through Pasco and Hernando and Citrus counties on US 19, which ran the Gulf Coast through the old Florida towns, Newport Richey, Holiday, Tarpon Springs, Arapaca, Bioport, whacky, the towns that hadn't become anything in particular and had decided that was fine, the towns that existed at the edge of the water and the edge of the highway and required nothing of you except your presence. He got onto State Route 24 at Chiefland at 11:40. The road committed itself west into the marsh, and he felt the moment it happened, the road's commitment, the marsh opening up, the direction becoming singular. The headlights picked up the white eyes of things in the roadside ditches, and the ghost shapes of the herons standing stock still in the low water, waiting for whatever came next with the patience of creatures for whom waiting was not a condition but a method. He got to the marina at 12:20. Deanne had left the dock lights on, which she did when she knew he was coming back late, which was not policy and not in the marina lease agreement, but was what Deanne did. And he had stopped thinking of it as anything other than a fact of the place, like the tide schedule and the smell of low water and Pete on his piling. Pete was on his piling. Midnight in Cedar Key, Florida, and the Pelican was on his piling in the dock lights with his eyes open and his wings slightly spread the way he spread them sometimes in the dark for reasons he kept to himself. Gumbo tied off and sat on the stern with the last Yingling from the cooler he'd packed Monday morning and looked at Pete. "Kyle Shores is in Georgia," he said. Pete made the sound. "I know," Gumbo said. "Florida's loss." He drank the beer and looked at the harbor. The water was black and still, the dock lights making their small yellow reflections in it. Somewhere in the channel a mullet jumped and didn't come back up. He thought about the last Tuesday. He thought about what Linda Marchetti had asked, "Will you come back?" He thought about what Mike Alderman had said, "You're welcome if you do." He'd told Linda he didn't know. He'd been honest. He still didn't know. But he thought about it the whole drive home, which was the thing you did when you didn't know something, but suspected it was going to resolve itself in a particular direction if you gave it enough road. He gave it enough road. He finished the beer. He went below and made a cast iron skillet situation with the snapper Renata had left in the cooler on the dock. Butter, capers, a lemon he'd had since Monday, the last of the fresh dill from the Marina Store's small herb rack. He ate it at the galley table with the composition book closed and the radio on at low volume. A classic rock station out of Gainesville, fading in and out across the flat, dark counties. Renata called at 12:50. "You're back," she said. She knew the sound of his galley, the specific acoustic of the boat when he was cooking late. "Just ate. How'd it go?" He thought about all of it. The circle of chairs. Dave and the foundation pour, and Casey's name. Lorraine and the attempt. Bob and Linda, and the question she'd asked across a grief group room without knowing if the answer would be what she wanted. Complicated, he said. And okay. Those usually go together, she said. They do. He looked at the radio. The Gainesville station was playing something he half recognized from a summer he'd been 19, which was a specific kind of late-night temporal dislocation that only happened when you'd driven a long way and eaten good fish and the lights were low. Thank you for the snapper. Marco caught it. He'll want the credit. Tell him it was perfect. He knows, she said. Good night, Gumbo. Good night. Thursday, he filed the case report. It was 4 pages, which was longer than average, because the case had more layers than average, and Beverly Sutton had paid for clarity, and he intended to provide it. He described the RV operation, the LLC structure, the coastal premier timeshare, the affected families, the restitution process underway, the cooperation agreement Kyle had signed before relocating to Georgia. He attached the photographs, the revenue spreadsheet, the Secretary of State filings, the property listings. He sent it to Beverly with his final invoice. She paid the same day. She sent a text that said, Randy got the Allegro back this morning. He washed it himself. He found a Kyle is King bumper sticker on the rear bumper and spent 20 minutes getting it off. He has not said anything about it. I'm letting him have that. Gumbo read this twice and found it sufficient. He wrote the case title on the closed folders tab in black marker, Holy Rollers, Cog, Pasco, Shores. He put the folder in the chart cabinet between the other closed cases. He sat on the stern with the composition book and turned to the last written page and read back through it, all 31 pages, which he didn't always do but did today, which meant he was done with the case and was checking his own work, the way you checked the composition book at the end of a job to make sure you'd noted the things that needed noting and hadn't noted the things that shouldn't be there. He'd noted what needed noting. At the bottom of the last page, he wrote 3 lines. Kyle Shores flinched. The group keeps running. Lorraine said the attempt counts. He closed the book. Pete pressed the doorbell. La cucaracha, 4 notes, incomplete as always. Not yet, Gumbo said. Give me a minute. Pete did not give him a minute. Pete pressed the doorbell again. Fine, Gumbo said. He went below and got the fish, fresh mullet from Tommy Hurd's boat, Cedar Key water, the standard Pete had established and from which he would accept no deviation, and came back up and broke off a piece and held it out. Pete took it with the practiced dignity of a creature receiving what was owed rather than what was given. Gumbo broke off another piece and held it out, and Pete took that too. They sat like that in the afternoon sun at Slip 12, the harbor moving in its small rhythms, the mullet jumping somewhere off the east end, the tourist kayaks coming in from their loops around the barrier keys. A great blue heron worked the shallows at the far edge of the marina, with the focused patience it had been bringing to the shallows since before the concept of grief groups, or LLC structures, or bumper stickers that took 20 minutes to remove. He thought about the drive up next Tuesday. He thought about the circle of chairs. He didn't decide anything. He gave Pete the last of the mullet and sat back in the stern chair and let the harbor tell him what it always told him, which was that the water was moving and had always been moving and would be moving long after everything else resolved itself one way or another, and that this was not a discouraging thought but a useful one. The sun moved. The harbor moved. Pete pressed the doorbell one more time, because Pete always wanted the last word, and in Gumbo's experience, the best response to a creature that always wanted the last word was to let it have the last word, and sit quietly in the aftermath and call that peace. He sat quietly. He called it peace. The Jeep was in the parking lot. State Route 24 ran 41 miles east to Chiefland, where it met US 19, where you could go north or south, toward Gainesville or toward Tampa, and from Tampa north you could get to Land Lakes in another 40 minutes, and in Land O'Lakes there was a community life center, and a circle of chairs, and a coffee station, and a bulletin board with a lost cat notice and a child's drawing that said "We are okay" in crayon the color of a Florida afternoon. He didn't decide. He let Tuesday come. The end. Want more Gumbo adventure mysteries? Check out Dumb and Famous, Pie Problems, Sweet Trouble, Jack the Stripper, Sand Trap, Messing Around, Baked Naked, Senior Discount, Hijinks, Holy Rollers.